A regular salaryman starts his evening by picking up the latest volume of his favorite light novel series. Walking through the pouring rain, he starts planning out his night, a quick meal, a hot bath, and then finally getting some reading done in a warm bed. He cracks a small smile, thinking about how he finally has a little reward waiting for him after a long day of work. But on the way home, things take a sudden turn. A massive bolt of lightning tears through the city and hits him directly, ending his life in an instant. He wakes up in a vast, white void, wondering if he really is dead. Before he can even process the situation, a giant figure towers over him and offers a blunt apology. The man is incredibly stern, giving off a heavy pressure that makes it clear he isn't just some random person. Fidgeting slightly, he tries to find the right words to explain the mess. He introduces himself as the god of thunder and admits he accidentally zapped the wrong guy while venting some anger. He says he totally gets how unfair this whole situation is. Holding up a finger, he suggests a special deal to make up for the mistake. He leans in and asks if he'd like to try reincarnating in another world. The words barely sink in as he repeats the offer to himself in stunned silence. When he doesn't answer right away, the god starts sweating and wonders if it was a bad idea. The silence breaks when he suddenly lights up, asking if this is like those fantasy novels with magic, swords, and cute girls. To sweeten the deal, the god even promises to throw in his own divine protection as a special bonus. Realizing he's making a bit of a scene, the young man finally cools down and offers a quick apology. The deity just smiles and hands over a heavy book that contains everything there is to know about the new world. Flipping through the pages, he tries to get a feel for the life waiting for him. He starts picturing the usual fantasy staples, from kings and knights to piles of treasure. The guidebook describes his favorite kind of story, where a protagonist grows into the world's strongest mage. It's the simple path of making allies, defeating tough enemies, and earning everyone's trust to become a hero. In his old life, he was just another face in a crowded city, always staying invisible and following the rules. After years of just blending in, he's realized he doesn't want to be a background character anymore. Looking at the god, he admits that this time, he wants to actually matter. His choice is made. He's leaving the corporate world behind to finally be the main character of his own story. Reincarnated gives a small smile and agrees to the deal, raising his hand to get things started. Suddenly, the salaryman feels himself lifting off the ground as a strange light surrounds him. Panicking, he asks if they're really doing this right now, but the god just wishes him luck and tells him to be well. A massive pillar of lightning crashes down, erasing him from the void and sending him toward his new life. As the light fades, Reincarnated sits back and lets out a heavy sigh. He admits to himself that the accidental death story was just a lie to get the guy to agree to the move. Taking a big gulp of sake, he looks a little worried about how easy it was to trick him. He stares into the empty space, wondering if someone that gullible can survive in a world like that. Since the dice are already tossed, he just wishes Sizzle luck on the long journey ahead. Sizzle's eyes snap open to a blurry world as he hears a soft voice calling his name. Looking up, he sees a beautiful woman smiling down at him, clearly thrilled that he is finally awake. When he tries to answer, only a squeak comes out, and he freezes at the sight of his own tiny, stubby hands. It hits him right then that he really is an infant now, though he's relieved to see his new mom looks kind and wealthy. Relaxing into her arms, he decides he's happy with the setup so far. Irina carries him toward a massive stone brazier, explaining that as a full braze, he is destined to receive the protection of fire. He peers out from his swaddling clothes, wondering what kind of ritual she has in mind. Thinking it over, he realizes just how lucky he is to land in such a high-status family with magical perks. That comfort vanishes when she hoists him directly over the roaring flames to ask for a blessing. The heat is overwhelming, and he lets out a panicked cry as the fire flares up. He screams with everything he has, genuinely worried he is about to be cooked alive. Hearing the commotion, Irina pulls him into a hug and tries to soothe him with a few gentle words. When she looks down at his face, she smiles, mistakenly thinking he is just crying because he's so excited about the fire blessing. Ignoring the tears, she says it is time to finish the job and brings him right back over the burning brazier. Sizzle thinks this is insane, figuring he's never read a story where the mother tries to kill the baby right after reincarnation. Facing the heat, he realizes he's going to die before his hero journey even begins. Irina just keeps smiling down at him, totally oblivious to his terror as a strange rumbling fills the air. Reaching his breaking point, he screams out a desperate prayer for the thunder god to save him. Instead of a miracle, the ritual suddenly stops as Irina looks up, her face going pale. The knights around her freeze on the spot, staring into the sky in total disbelief. Seeing the threat, one of them screams for her to run, the reflection of a monster already filling his eyes. A massive dragon slams down into the courtyard, towering over the estate with a terrifying growl. Pulling him close, Irina stares up at the massive creature in shock. He just freezes, wondering if dragons are an everyday thing here, or if the thunder god just has a sick sense of humor. Guards scramble in a panic around them, screaming for everyone to hold their ground and protect the estate. Clinging to her clothes, he feels small and useless as the monster looms over them. Despite the danger, she manages a gentle smile and whispers that someone will save them soon. But then he notices her hand is shaking like crazy. He realizes she is actually petrified, but she's putting on a brave face just for him. Seeing her tremble while she holds him tight makes the danger feel very real. She's clearly terrified, yet she won't let go of him for even a second. Feeling her warmth, he starts to understand that she's acting this way just because she's his mother. It's a strange sensation, being loved this much by someone he barely knows. The moment is cut short as the dragon lunges closer, its eyes locked right on them. He knows he can't just sit there and let her get hurt. The dragon towers over them, casting a shadow that swallows the entire room. It lets out a roar so loud it practically shakes the floor beneath them. As she pulls him tight against her chest, her whole body trembles with fear. Looking up at the monster, he knows he's done playing the part of a helpless infant. His eyes burn with an intensity that doesn't belong to a baby. Suddenly, a massive dark magic circle forms right above the dragon's head. The monster stops in its tracks, looking up at the strange power in total confusion. Suddenly, a massive bolt of lightning tears through the sky and slams right into the dragon's head. Before it can even scream, the surge of electricity swallows it whole. Looking at the destruction, Sizzle reflects on the second life he was given by a god. He knows things will only get harder from here, but he's determined to find the strength to protect his new family. Becoming a hero is the only path left for him. He looks down at the remains of the dragon as the dust finally settles, the massive threat finally gone. His eyes grow heavy, the exhaustion of the fight finally catching up to him. Since he is still in an infant's body, he can't fight the urge to nap any longer and lets his eyes drift shut. A guard scoops him up, completely baffled that the kid is snoring away after everything that just happened. Nearby, everyone is shouting for Lady Irina, desperate to make sure the family is actually okay. They find her resting on the ground, exhausted but safe. On the same day, the kingdom finally rid itself of the Black Dragon. When the official investigation wraps up, the authorities realize a literal infant was the one who took the beast down. This news spreads fast, and soon everyone is calling him the miracle baby. Sucking on his thumb while he naps, he has no idea his life as a hero has already started. His name is Sizzle. Years pass by, and life settles into a comfortable routine at the massive family estate. A voice calls out for him to wake up, but he just buries himself deeper into the blankets and begs for 5 more minutes. Ignoring his pleas, a pair of boots clicks purposefully across the floor. Marl, his personal maid, whips the curtains open to let the morning sun flood the bedroom. When he winces at the light, she just laughs and warns him that she'll start messing with him if he doesn't get out of bed. Sizzle finally sits up, now 7 years old and fully settled into his life as a young noble. Mar greets him with her usual high energy, smiling like she's already been awake for hours. Since his schedule is packed, She starts helping him change out of his pajamas to get things moving. Letting out a massive yawn, he tries to shake off the sleep while she keeps the room lively. With her help, he finally gets on his feet to face whatever the mansion has in store for him today. He reminds her again that he can handle getting dressed on his own, sending Marl into a dramatic tailspin. Letting out a fake sob, she pouts about how much she wanted to help him today. Her official title is personal maid, but he really thinks of her more like a sister. Having been by his side since he was an infant, she has become the person he trusts most in the world. Leaving her to her work, Sizzle turns toward the mirror to check his reflection. 7 years have passed since he woke up here, but it's still a trip to remember he was once a 30-year-old guy in another world. Staring at his face, he figures the Thunder God really went all out with the gifts. He's got the perfect, noble looks and the unique lightning magic to back it up. Sizzle finished getting ready and tells Marl they should probably head down to the dining hall. She follows behind him with a visible pout, still muttering that she'd definitely be the one to dress him tomorrow. As they walk, she points out how he's way too responsible and independent for a noble his age. Looking at her, he just laughs it off, knowing his adult brain won't let him sit back and be a spoiled brat. Marl even brings up the time he shocked the whole house by trying to sit down and eat lunch with the servants. He just laughs it off, saying the massive dining hall felt way too lonely for one person. It seemed like a total waste of space to sit there by himself. The social ladder in this world is pretty strict, and while he's supposed to act like a proper noble, those 30 years as a regular guy are hard to forget. Honestly, he still feels way more at home with the commoners than the elites. As they keep walking, Marl mentions his father wants to have a chat with him later today. He freezes for a second, wondering what his old man could possibly want. He suddenly brightens up, wondering if this means he can finally start his magic training. The goal has always been to become the world's strongest mage, so the thought alone has him pumped. Marl watches him with a smile, mentioning how much he seems to love his studies. Puffing out his chest, he looks pretty proud of himself. Still, she quickly bursts his bubble, explaining that a magic lesson probably isn't what his father has planned. As they walk through the hallway, she reminds him that magic is dangerous and usually reserved for older kids. Even if he is a special case, the rules still apply. Hearing that, he goes quiet and just stares ahead, clearly lost in thought. He thinks back to how magic works in this kingdom, where every noble baby gets a blessing from the spirits at 6 months old. It's a bit of a lottery between the 6 main elements, though most kids just inherit the same power as their parents. His father and brother are no exception, since the full Braze line has been nothing but fire users for generations. Marl confirms it with a smile, mentioning how their entire noble house is famous for that specific strength. Going quiet, he realizes that while everyone else fits the pattern, he is the only one who doesn't. That's because he was born with the Thunder Blessing, an attribute that technically shouldn't even exist. Since he is the first person in history to have it, the kingdom eventually stepped in to protect him. However, his lack of fire magic caused a massive scandal at birth, with people even doubting his mother's loyalty to the family. Now that he is older, he realizes nobody in the world actually knows how to teach him how to use his power. Plus, the mere thought of the scary head wife blocking his path makes him turn pale. He explains that the family has 2 wives, the first wife, Elizabeth, and his own mother, Irina. Surprisingly, there isn't any of that messy drama you'd expect from a house like this. He figures the head wife in a bad person at heart. Still, she is incredibly strict with him. Since he isn't the heir, she treats him like her own son and drills him on noble etiquette every chance she gets. Seeing him shake, Marl points out that his anxiety is showing on his face. He's just thinking about the time Elizabeth told him to hurry up and get his own territory already, which is a lot to ask a 7-year-old. Still, he wonders if Marl finds the woman as scary as he does. She doesn't hold back, admitting there are rumors about servants getting sent to the middle of nowhere for making a single mistake. Then the realization hits her and she clamps her hands over her mouth, looking shocked at her own honesty. She starts waving her hands and blushing, begging him not to make her say such dangerous things out loud. Trying to move on, she reminds him that he's actually incredibly powerful. Even if he doesn't remember it, she claims he took down a disaster dragon when he was just a baby. He just nods along, playing the part of the oblivious kid, but he actually remembers that day perfectly. The image of that terrifying dragon is still burned into his mind. Recalling the chaos, he remembers the raw power surging from his tiny body to end the threat. Even now, he feels like his gift is the real reason for all the drama his mother has to deal with. When Ma notices him spacing out, she calls his name to snap him back to reality. They finally reach the dining hall, where he quickly shifts his focus to what's for lunch. His appetite will have to wait, because time moves fast and he's already 7 years old. Marl is right there to wake him up, radiating her usual cheer as she jokes about her energy being her only good trait. Letting out a big yawn, he listens as she mentions their busy schedule and the need to get changed. She starts unbuttoning his shirt, not wasting a single second. After that, he just stands there patiently while she prepares the rest of his outfit for the day. Marl suddenly bursts back into the room, calling out his name as if she's been gone for hours. He stops her right there, reminding her for the 100th time that he can get dressed on his own. Hearing that sends her into a small pout, as she whines about really wanting to help him today. Still, she's been by his side since the day he was born, acting more like an older sister than a servant. To him, she's the one person in this household he truly considers family. She pouts at the rejection. Still, she insists that next time, she is definitely the one dressing him. Laughing to himself, he figures there is no way he's letting a young girl handle his clothes. Once he is ready, he asks if she's finally set to head down to the dining hall. Walking beside him, she mentions how he is so responsible that he doesn't even act like a typical noble. Apparently, she still hasn't recovered from the time he asked to eat his meals with the servants instead of sitting alone. He just gives her a sheepish grin and apologizes for the old drama. To him, sitting in that massive dining hall by himself just felt like a huge waste of space. Walking past a line of bowing staff, he thinks about the wall between nobles and commoners. 30 years of living at a regular guy hard to shake, and he admits he is probably more suited for a simpler life anyway. Marl breaks his train of thought to let him know that his father, Duke Glenn, wants to speak with him later. He stops in his tracks, wondering what could be so important, since a direct summons from his dad is pretty rare. Sizzle's eyes light up as he asks if this means he finally gets to start his magic training. Beaming, he proudly claims he's going to be the world's strongest mage after she notes his love for books. She giggles at the idea but quickly admits that it's probably not the reason for the summons. As they walk, she reminds him that magic is dangerous stuff that kids usually aren't allowed to touch until they're older. He falls into a thoughtful silence when she mentions how special he is. In this kingdom, noble babies receive a blessing from the spirits once they turn 6 months old. While there are 6 standard elements, most children just inherit whatever power their parents have. His family is no exception, with his father and brother carrying on a long line of fire users. Marl chirps in to confirm that the Full Blaze name has always been famous for those flames. Looking down, Sizzle can't help but feel like the odd one out. He knows his own gift doesn't belong on that list. Instead of the 6 standard elements, he was born with the blessing of lightning, a rare power that technically shouldn't even exist. It made him a big deal to the kingdom, but back then, people actually suspected his mother of being unfaithful because he didn't inherit the family fire. Since lightning magic is a complete mystery, there isn't anyone around who can actually teach him how to use it. Plus, the Duke's first wife would never allow a child from the second wife to get that kind of special training. Just the thought of her is enough to make him break into a nervous sweat. He clarifies that when people mention the madam around here, they're talking about that scary first wife, not his mom. Elizabeth is the one who stays in the shadows, while his mother, Irina, is the second wife. Surprisingly, their relationship is in some messy drama, and he doesn't think the first wife is actually a bad person. Still, she is incredibly strict. She spends her days drilling noble etiquette into him, hammering every rule into his head even though he isn't the heir. The memory alone makes him shake. He recalls his mom apologizing because people keep telling him to hurry up and move out, which is a lot for a 7-year-old to handle. Still, he wonders if Marl finds his stepmother just as scary as he does. She admits that if a servant messes up even once, they get shipped straight to the border. Realizing she'd said way too much out loud, she clamps her hands over her mouth in a panic. Turning red, she tells him he shouldn't be tricking her into saying such dangerous things. To change the subject, she reminds him that he's actually incredibly powerful apparently. He even took down the Dragon of Calamity when he was a baby. He nods along, telling her he was just a baby and it's all a blur. The truth is, he remembers every single second of it. The image of that monster is still burned into his mind. He can still feel the terrifying power that surged from his own tiny body during the fight. Even worse, he knows that moment is the real reason his family is in such a mess right now. Suddenly, he snaps out of his head and leads the way to the dining hall, asking what's for lunch to keep things light. Mar just stares after him, looking a bit surprised by his sudden change in mood. He heads into the dining hall and stops once he sees his mother sitting at the table. Irina turns her head and smiles warmly, clearly happy to hear his voice. She mentions she is feeling much better today, so she had the staff bring her out to eat for a change. Taking her hand, he notices she really does seem more energetic than usual. She just beams, telling him that getting to spend time with him makes it a perfect morning. Watching her is always bittersweet, though. The lightning from that dragon attack took away her sight and left her lower body paralyzed. Despite her blindness, she reaches out and gently cups his face. She smiles warmly, remarking on how much he has grown lately. Sizzo laughs, reminding her it has only been 3 days since they last saw each other. Still, she just keeps petting his head, joking that he must be in a massive growth spurt. He looks away with a blush, clearly flustered by the attention. Watching the scene, Marl can't help but giggle. She teases him for acting like a total mama's boy the second he is in this room. Just then, she catches a sharp glare from the staff, reminding her to keep her mouth shut. Irina seems to sense his anxiety anyway and claps her hands with a bright smile. She asks if her little gentleman can escort her to lunch. Seeing her so cheerful makes him blush, and he thinks to himself that mothers really are amazing. He gives her a big grin and tells her of course. Reaching out, he gently takes her hand to lead the way. As they walk, he notices she still looks pretty pale. It makes sense, considering she spends her whole day cooped up in a dark room to keep the sunlight away from her sensitive eyes. Since his parents from his old life are long gone, 7 years of growing up with Irina has made her his real mother in every way that matters. Looking at her, he decides he has to find a way to save her. He wants to see her walk under the sun again and watch her eyes finally light up. To make that dream a reality, he slips away to a quiet spot in the garden to ensure he is completely alone. He recalls how people in his old world used to say that kids soak up knowledge like sponges. Letting these peak years go by without any progress feels like a massive waste to him. With that in mind, he decides he can't just sit around for 5 more years until he's old enough for magic school. Tiny sparks of electricity begin to crackle and dance between his fingers as he focuses his will. Giving his hand a small, confident look, he gets ready to push himself once again. Even back when he was a tiny infant who couldn't move, he wasn't just sitting around. He could already feel the spirits drifting nearby, sensing their energy while resting in his mother's lap. By trying to talk to them, he figured out they would lend him their power in exchange for a bit of his mana. Looking back on it now, he realizes just how reckless it was to experiment like that as a baby. He would constantly drain his mana until he hit his limit, forcing his reserves to grow through sheer repetition. Now, he's ready to see just how far that dangerous training has taken him. He kicks things off by activating Lightning Boost, feeling the electricity crackle around his small frame. Suddenly, he lunges forward with a look of intense focus, realizing the massive amount of mana he's built up is finally under his control. Rolling his shoulder, he notices the whole process is finally starting to feel smooth and natural. A deep breath follows. As he centers the energy in his core, he bounds between the thick branches, feeling a natural flow he's never experienced before. Landing firmly to catch his breath, he decides it's time for the real test. With a quick motion, he pulls a jagged blade of pure electricity right out of thin air. Seeing the sparks dance in his hand brings a huge smile to his face as he realizes his secret training is paying off. He can't help but grin at the sight of the glowing blade. Holding the weapon up, he thinks there is just something special about crafting his own gear from scratch. Then he starts experimenting, pushing his mana to shift until the lightning transforms into a heavy axe. While it looks impressive, he admits to himself that changing its shape still takes way too much time. He remembers how heroes in the manga from his past life could swap weapons in a blink. But things aren't quite that simple here. Wiping the sweat from his face, he lets out a quiet sigh and accepts that he still has a lot of work to do. A 1-second delay in changing weapons could mean life or death in a real fight, so he knows he has to find a way to speed it up. He stops to catch his breath, his lungs burning from the effort of the session. While physical reinforcement is great, he can't keep it up for long without hitting a wall, so he decides to call it a day. Slumping back, he lets out a long exhale while realizing his to-do list is only getting longer. On top of the training, having to hide everything from the rest of the family is really starting to wear him down. He flops down into the grass, thinking about how messy things would get if someone caught him out here. Just the thought of the head wife finding out makes him break into a cold sweat, as she would likely exile him to some remote border town. Suddenly, he snaps out of it and bolts upright when a memory finally clicks. He realizes his father summoned him a while ago and starts heading back, wondering what the meeting is even about. He finally makes it to the study and gives the door a soft knock, asking if his father is ready for him. A deep voice responds from the other side, confirming it's really him. Inside, Glenn sits in a large chair with a hand to his face, looking as serious as ever. The atmosphere in the room is heavy, and he simply tells the boy to come in. He stands there with his arms crossed, looking exactly like the legend known as Glenn Fullblaze. As a master of both the sword and fire magic, he spent his younger days right on the front lines fighting the Demon King. The boy looks up at him silently, matching that heroic image with the man standing before him. Suddenly, his father's gaze sharpens, locking onto him with a look that feels like it's piercing right through his secrets. Glenn suddenly lets out a loud laugh, dropping the serious act and gesturing for Sizzle to take a seat. Leaning in with a grin, he asks how things have been, though the boy just gives a non-committal shrug to stay safe. Sizzle tries to keep his guard up, politely claiming that his daily life is pretty ordinary. That gets a scoff from Glenn, who points out how crazy it is for a 7-year-old to actually beat a professional knight. Feeling the heat, Sizzle rubs the back of his neck and insists it took him to whole years of training unless to get that lucky. Glenn just grins at that, saying the kid's cheeky attitude is a perfect match for his own. He figures it's just the age where boys want to act a bit wild. Sizzle stares back blankly, thinking his behavior is still a huge improvement over his father's. Apparently, his dad used to ditch the mansion just to hang out at the Adventurers Guild instead of studying. When the hero offers to tell some legendary war stories, Sizzle shuts him down without a second thought. That rejection sends Glenn slumping back into his chair, looking pretty deflated. Now that the fighting is over, he's stuck spending his time on boring territory management and lordly duties. Looking off to the side, he sighs, admitting those days on the front lines were way more fun. Despite those old war stories, Sizzle figures they actually make a pretty good team. Since he still has his memories from his past life, he feels more like he's hanging out with a friend than a father figure. Setting the jokes aside, the legendary hero finally gets to the real reason he called for this meeting. He mentions noticing his son has been reading through magic books for a long time, which makes the boy visibly flinch. Leaning in with a sharp smirk, he adds that he knows the kid has been secretly practicing his spells, too. Sizzle can only stare back in silence, realizing his biggest secret is finally out. He stands there sweating, wondering if he's about to get a massive lecture now that his cover is blown. Deciding to try his last resort, he switches gears and puts on his most innocent face to ask what his father could possibly mean. Glenn doesn't buy it for a second, staring at the performance with a flat, deadpan expression. When the act fails, the boy pretends to be heartbroken, asking how a parent could say such mean things to their own kid. Still, his father loses his temper and shouts that no son of his would ever be such a suck-up. He tells the kid to stop the games and use his strength to prove himself instead. Sizzle closes his eyes and acts like he's thinking about the offer, trying his best to look calm. Glenn calls him out immediately, yelling that the kid is leaking mana like he's ready to fight. When tiny sparks jump from his hand, Sizzle realizes his cover is totally blown. Seeing that reaction, Glenn asks if they should just take the fight outside. Sizzle quickly shuts that down, admitting he's way too scared of what his stepmother would do if they wrecked the house. That excuse actually works, and the room falls into a brief, awkward silence. Finally, Glenn settles down and explains he didn't bring him here just for a lecture. He actually has some big news to share. He points out that since Sizzle is almost 8 and pretty mature for his age, he should be ready to handle some real responsibility. Sizzle stares back, connecting the dots between the magic talk and his upcoming birthday while a bad feeling starts to sink in. Hoping for the best, he puts on a brave face and says he can handle whatever comes his way. That gets a proud cheer from Glenn, who reveals that Sizzle will be acting as the Lord Representative starting tomorrow. He just freezes with a blank stare, realizing his quiet life is officially over. He isn't taking the news sitting down, protesting that he should at least get to use magic freely if he's doing all this work. His dad isn't moved at all, simply pointing out that no such deal was ever made. Slamming the table, the kid threatens to snitch to his stepmother about his father slacking off, though Glenn quickly counters by threatening to reveal the secret magic training. Since that's a stalemate, Sizzle decides to play dirty by mentioning a certain girl with a cute voice his father visited at a tavern the other day. The legendary hero starts sweating, demanding to know how his son could possibly have found out about that. Sizzle explains that he treats spirits like radio waves, basing the idea on how phones and TVs worked in his previous world. After some more practice, he even managed to pick up audio, leading him to name this custom Magic Thunder Search. It lets him pin down exactly where a person is and hear what they are saying. While it currently only works on people he knows within the city, he caught his dad purely by accident while testing the range. He originally planned to stop for the sake of his father's privacy, but with Glenn constantly making things difficult, he figures he might just keep his ears open a little longer. Glenn just laughs the whole thing off, claiming he was only teasing his favorite son. Finally caving, he agrees to let the kid use magic openly, just like they discussed. Still, Sizzle wonders if his dad can actually handle the fallout with his stepmother. Crossing his arms, the legendary hero tells the boy to trust him, insisting he's the kind of guy who gets things done when it counts. Sizzle beams with a bright smile and calls his father reliable. He immediately follows it up with a threat to spread those tavern rumors if his dad fails, looking way too happy for someone being so cold. He sits there blushing, completely lost in his own world now that he can use magic out in the open. Glenn watches him for a moment before dropping a massive bombshell, announcing with a huge grin that he has already chosen a fiancé for him. The kid doesn't even blink, just nodding along while his mind stays miles away. This completely kills the mood for Glenn, who starts pouting because his big announcement was supposed to be the highlight of the day. Seeing his dad get this grumpy finally makes him sweat. He quickly snaps back to reality, figuring he has pushed his luck far enough for one day. He tries to act natural, putting on a fake smile and telling his dad he's actually happy about the news. Seeing the boy's reaction, Glenn beams and mentions that the first meeting is actually scheduled for tomorrow. He tells him to make sure he's ready. That's the breaking point for Sizzle, who lets out a shocked scream as the reality finally sinks in. It's easy to forget because of his pushy attitude, but Gren Fulbraze is actually a major figure in this kingdom. During the Great War against the Demon King, he fought on the front lines as a legendary hero. Looking up at him, the boy remembers that his father is a master of both elite swordsmanship and fire magic. This is the legendary Thunder Emperor, and more importantly, he's the man Sizzle calls Dad. He kicks back on the sofa and casually asks how things have been going lately. Laughing, he tells him to take a seat, acting more like a proud parent than a scary legend. Sizzle plays it cool and says things are pretty normal. His dad finds that hilarious, reminding him that most 7-year-olds can't exactly take down a professional knight. Rubbing the back of his head, he admits it took him 2 years of secret practice to even get this far. His dad just laughs, saying that cheeky attitude is a perfect match for his own personality. Looking completely unimpressed, Sizzle points out he's still better behaved than a father who ditched home for the Adventurers Guild. This just makes the man's eyes light up as he offers to share some of his old war stories, but the kid shuts him down immediately. He groans at the rejection, clearly missing the thrill of his younger years. Since he can't stay on the battlefield forever, he now spends his days stuck behind a desk, reluctantly managing the family estate. Because of his father's wild and unnoble personality, the two of them actually get along surprisingly well. Since he still has memories from his past life, he even sees the man more as a friend than a strict parent. Moving things along, the older man brings up the real reason he called for this meeting. He reveals that he's noticed the kid reading magic books for a long time now. Adding to the pressure, he admits he even knows about the secret training sessions, leaving the boy completely stunned. He looks down, realizing his cover is totally blown. He suspected his dad might have noticed something, but hearing it out loud makes him worrying a long lecture is coming next. With his back against the wall, he decides to pull out his ultimate weapon. He gives his dad the most innocent look he can manage, pretending he has no idea what training sessions he's talking about. That doesn't work for even a second. Gren thus stares back with a deadpan expression, looking genuinely grossed out by the whole display. Seeing the cold reaction, Sizzle immediately switches to playing the victim. He starts tearing up and complains that a father shouldn't say such mean things to his adorable son. Gren tells him to knock it off, yelling that no son of his should act that pathetic. He insists the boy should use his own strength to get what he wants instead of playing games. The boy nods like he understands the lesson, though he's already planning his next move. Catching him trying to prep a sneaky spell, Gren yells at him for letting his magic leak out. When he offers to take things outside for a real fight, the kid immediately declines, admitting he's too scared of his stepmother to cause a scene. They both settle onto the couch as the room finally goes quiet. Adjusting his glove, the man explains he didn't just call him in for a lecture, he actually has some good news. He points out that since his son is turning 8 soon, it's time he started acting like a responsible adult. Sizzle stares off, his mind racing as he tries to guess what the news is. Since his birthday is close, he figures he's finally getting permission to use magic. Getting all excited, he shouts that he can handle whatever responsibility his dad throws at him, which earns him some quick praise from the man. Then, with a massive grin, Gren drops the news. Starting tomorrow, he wants his 7-year-old son to take over all his duties as the acting lord. The kid just stares at him with a completely blank expression. He finally snaps and asks why he can't just have permission to use magic already. Pouting, he argues the conversation was clearly heading that way, but his father just shrugs and denies ever saying it. When logic fails, he threatens to tell his stepmother about his father's laziness, only for the man to counter by threatening to report the kid for using illegal magic. Still, he has one more card to play, so he mentions a certain girl with a cute voice he saw at the tavern the other day. His dad freezes in shock, wondering how his son could possibly know about his secret outing. The secret is actually pretty simple. He used his memories of modern tech to treat spirits like radio waves, figuring he could transmit signals if he tried hard enough. Eventually, he managed to pick up audio through the static and named the whole system Thunder Surge. It only works on people he knows within the city limits for now. That is how he accidentally caught his dad red-handed during his last secret getaway. With a sly look, he admits he was going to stop for the sake of privacy. But if his dad keeps being difficult, he might just have to keep the surveillance going. Gren starts sweating and forces a laugh, claiming he was only teasing his favorite son. Sizzle looks up in shock as his father admits he was planning to give him magic permission anyway. When the kid's eyes light up, he asks if his father can really handle the stepmother's reaction. Gren just strikes a confident pose and tells him to trust his old man. Smiling brightly, Sizzle calls him reliable, but then he adds that if the plan fails, those tavern rumors are going public anyway. Hearing that sends a very real chill down his father's spine. He closes his eyes and smiles, finally soaking in the fact that he can use magic without hiding it anymore. The news is so sudden that the kid just stares blankly, his brain still stuck on his magic permit. Seeing the lack of reaction, his father keeps talking, trying to get a rise out of him. Realizing he's about to ruin the mood, Sizzle tries to pull himself together. Still, the older man pouts and insists that this wedding talk is actually the main reason they're even meeting. Just as he's celebrating, his dad leans in with a wide grin to drop a massive bombshell. Gren announces that a marriage partner has already been picked out for him. Sizzle tries to play it off, forcing a fake, sparkly smile and telling his dad he's just overwhelmed with joy. Looking delighted by the response, Gren adds that the meeting is actually happening tomorrow morning, so he better get ready. That's the final straw. Sizzle freezes on the spot, his face going pale as he lets out a scream of pure disbelief. The next morning arrives with Irina throwing the curtains wide to announce that the big day is finally here. Burying his face in the blankets, he complains about being totally drained from his constant arguing with his old man. When she sees how casual he is, Irina tells him he's way too relaxed for a kid about to meet his future wife. After letting out a massive yawn, he admits that being born a second son usually leads to this kind of duty anyway. His father explains the bride is from the prestigious Lorelei family, a house that actually outranks their own. He adds that she's the second daughter and is exactly his age, which starts to ring a bell. Gren just keeps going, bragging about how she's beautiful and has an amazing personality. Hearing that, Sizzle realizes exactly who they're talking about, the girl known as the Blessingless Princess. With a heavy sigh, the old man slumps back, asking how his kid managed to hear about her reputation already. Shrugging it off, Sizzle explains that he's been doing plenty of research on local magic and noble families. It's a title given to a girl from a prestigious house who was born without any of the 6 elemental protections. Despite her noble blood, she never received a single divine blessing. Sizzle notices the timing of those rumors actually matches up with when he first got his thunder blessing. To him, the label people gave the girl seems pretty mean-spirited. Gren leans in with a stern look, warning his son to never say that name to her face. Apparently, her father is an overprotective parent who wouldn't take the insult well. Sizzle just sighs, realizing how much trouble he'd be in if he ever slipped up. The boy asks if this is really a good idea, pointing out that their future children might not even inherit his special powers. Gren tells him to stop worrying like an adult and just enjoy having a cute girl as a partner. The man laughs, telling his son to just relax and enjoy the fact that his partner is a cute girl. Shifting into analysis mode, he realizes this is all just a cold political game. If the main wife can't pass down the thunder blessing, the plan is likely to bring in others as backups to keep the lineage strong. To him, the whole setup feels like something straight out of a soap opera. Still, he figures there's no point in stressing over it now. He forces a bright smile and tells his father he'll play along and try to be happy about the match. Seeing his son finally fall in line, his father looks incredibly proud of his matchmaking skills. That smug moment is cut short when the door practically flies off its hinges. A furious voice screams his name, and the room goes from calm to chaotic in a heartbeat. It turns out that furious voice belongs to Irina, who is currently beaming over how great he looks in his new formal clothes. He stands there feeling a bit stiff, figuring this marriage meeting is going to be his first real battle in this world. Looking at the perfect fit, he realizes the servants must have been in on the plan the whole time since they already had a suit tailored. She just looks away and plays dumb when he asks how long they've been keeping secrets from him. Still, he gives her a flat look, clearly not buying the innocent act for a second. Mara wonders what kind of person the fiancé is, mentioning she's heard rumors about the girl being incredibly beautiful. Hoping for a good personality, Sizzle worries that if she's the prideful type, he'll be way out of his depth. More than that, he admits he has zero experience when it comes to girls. Seeing his nerves, Marl offers to lend him some of her own romance novels to study up. He isn't exactly comforted when she explains her favorite books are full of spicy scenes between men. He thinks back to his previous life, remembering all the manga and novels he read that didn't help his real-world love life at all. If reading actually made you a master of romance, he wouldn't be this stressed right now. Marl gives him a reassuring pat on the shoulder, insisting he's way too handsome to fail. She promises that once he arrives, every girl in the room will fall for him. Smiling back, Sizzle admits her pep talk actually gave him a bit of confidence. While his past life was empty of romance, he decides he's finally going to make those simple dreams of dating and holding hands a reality. Soon, the clatter of horse hooves fills the air as he begins the trip to the Lorelei estate. He arrives at the grand estate and finds a sophisticated man in glasses waiting to welcome them. Greeting them with a polite smile, the host says he wants to introduce his daughter without any delay. Inside the carriage, a young girl sits perfectly still with her head down. As he catches his first glimpse of her, Shizuru's eyes go wide. She steps out with her father's help, looking even more elegant than he imagined. Dropping into a graceful bow, she greets him with a soft and polite voice. His father shouting his name finally snaps him out of his daze. He quickly falls into a deep bow, managing to recover and formally introduce himself as a Sizzle Fullbraze. She replies softly, thanking him for the meeting and admitting she feels unworthy of such a match. Her father beams with pride at his daughter, while Glenn can only sigh at how much more mature she is compared to his own kid. Breaking the formal mood, Glenn laughs and jokes that Sizzle is just good at playing the part. He starts blabbing about how his son is actually quite a handful, leaving Sizzle to freeze in total shock. The man in glasses takes it all in, finding the idea of a hidden personality pretty interesting. Sizzle breaks into a cold sweat as he realizes the man's eyes aren't smiling at all. Glenn ignores his son's panic and suggests the adults go talk business while the kids hang out together. Stunned by the sudden move, Sizzle can barely even react. While he wonders how things moved this fast, Rukina stands there quietly, looking just as unsure about what they should even talk about. To make things even more intense, they find out she is officially staying at the estate for the next 3 months. Trying to break the awkward silence, she gives a gentle smile and asks him to ditch the formal titles and just call her Rukina. He breathes a huge sigh of relief, figuring that's a great first step, and asks her to call him Sizzle in return. But she immediately stops him, saying that just isn't right. He blinks in surprise, caught off guard by her sudden shift. Looking away, she explains that this engagement isn't a fair deal for him. Since she lacks divine protection, she figures she shouldn't hope for a normal marriage and thinks he's just being a hero. Still, she refuses to let her presence get in the way of the bright future he's supposed to have. Looking down, she explains she's happy to be used as a tool for his convenience, long as she can support his future. He just stares at her, unable to believe she'd say something so self-sacrificing. As they stand together in the dark, he asks if someone else put those terrible ideas in her head. Shaking her head, she insists that this is entirely her own choice. The sadness on her face makes it clear she genuinely thinks of herself as nothing more than a weight holding him back. Rather than arguing, he simply nods and suggests they keep moving. She looks a bit relieved to drop the subject and quietly follows his lead. Behind that calm look, Shizuru is actually getting competitive and telling himself to prepare for the challenge. Turning back with a hand over his heart, he makes a bold promise to make her smile one way or another. It's a complete shift from his earlier panic, showing he's finally ready to treat her as more than just a political partner. Marl isn't about to let him stay cool for long, though. Mimicking his big speech, she repeats that vow to make Rukina smile with a huge, mischievous grin. Suddenly, he turns bright red as the embarrassment finally hits him. He just stands there in silence, probably wishing he could take it all back. Marl keeps gushing over how noble he sounded, acting like a proud big sister. He snaps back that she has already said the same thing 5 times, but she doesn't seem to care. Turning away, he still can't believe she was spying on them the whole time. She leans in even closer, teasingly asking if he fell in love at first sight because of how cute the girl is. He immediately jumps back, face turning bright red as he tries to wave off the suggestion. Staring at the ground, he tries to explain his real reasons, but the words just won't come out. He realizes he's acting exactly like his old self from his previous world. Suddenly the panic sets in, and he clutches his head while his face turns bright red, looking for a bit of backup. He asks Marl if he did a good job, and she gives him a big thumbs up. Re-energized, he pumps his fist, promising himself that he'll find a way to become real friends with Lucina. He starts by trying to break the ice, asking what kind of things she likes. Lucina just looks back with empty eyes, saying she doesn't have any favorites or even things she hates. When he asks if she's struggling to adjust to a new home, she shuts him down again. She insists she doesn't need any special concern or worrying. Even an invitation to go out together gets a flat refusal. She figures her presence would just be a bother to him, so she politely asks to be left alone. Hearing that, he just slumps forward, crushed by the rejection. He flops onto the sofa and wonders if she just hates him. Shaking her head, Marl explains it isn't hate so much as her being way too reserved. She figures the girl is forcing herself to act that way just to avoid being a bother. Sizzle goes quiet as the weight of her situation finally starts to sink in. Marl points out that Lucina is only 7 years old. Since she was always treated like fragile glass, she learned to lock her feelings away just to stay out of the way. Hearing this, he realizes just how much she's had to endure so early in life. He wonders if the adults in her life, especially Lord Lore, even care enough to notice the damage. Just thinking about them ignoring her like this makes him grit his teeth in frustration. Clenching his arm, he thinks about how pathetic it is to dream of being a hero while failing to save a single girl right in front of him. Marl calls out to him, her voice snapping him back to reality as she notices the dark look on his face. When his eyes finally focus, they are filled with a new, sharp determination. He lets out a long sigh and clutches his head, realizing his magic was actually starting to leak out because he got so worked up. After cooling off, he thanks Marl for the talk, and she just gives him a bright, knowing smile. She reaches over and pats his head, telling him he is overthinking things way too much. Since he and Lucina just met, she suggests he should just take it slow and try to get closer one step at a time. Then, she suddenly remembers that his 8th birthday is actually right around the corner. The realization hits him instantly, and he agrees that the date is coming up fast. Mentioning that girls love big events and sweets, she gives him the perfect hint for a plan. It is exactly the kind of inspiration he needs to finally make a breakthrough with her. He realizes Marl is a total genius for coming up with a birthday plan. She just nods back confidently, looking proud of her suggestion. Smirking, she tells him to leave the social details to her and even offers some books to help him study up. He suddenly hops out of his chair, unable to just sit around now that he has a goal. Still energized, he bolts out of the room to start his preparations immediately. Watching him go, Marl smiles to herself, relieved to see he finally has his spark back. She calls out after him, striking a smug pose as she playfully repeats his dramatic vow. It's like she's already certain he'll pull it off and make the girl laugh. When he hears his own words thrown back at him, the poor kid turns bright red. staring at the floor. He just stays silent and lets the embarrassment sink in. Marl doesn't let up, wiping away fake tears as she praises him for finally becoming such a noble young man. He just glares at her, pointing out that she has repeated that exact same line 5 times now. It turns out she was hiding behind a tree and watching him the whole time. Leaning in with a grin, she asks if he just fell for the girl at first sight since she is so cute. The question makes him jump, and he immediately starts stammering out of denial with a bright red face. Quietly looking away, he tries to explain that his interest in her, in just about her looks. Looking at Lucana, he feels like he's watching his past life play out all over again. He hides his face in his hands, his skin burning as he realizes he got way too carried away. Marl watches with a cheeky grin, calling it a classic moment of youth. When he sheepishly asks if he did okay, she gives him a confident thumbs up. She tells him he was perfect and says he should keep reaching out even more. Pumping his fist in the air, he makes a fresh vow to finally become Lucana's friend. It won't be easy, considering how she always tells him she doesn't really have any likes or dislikes. Whenever he asks if she's struggling to adjust to the new area, she just insists there's no need to worry about her. Looking down, she even refuses his invitation to go outside, figuring she would only be a bother. Heartbroken by the rejection, Sizzle collapses face first into the cushions with a miserable groan. Slumped on the sofa, he wonders out loud if Lucana actually hates him. Marl shakes her head and reminds him that it isn't hate. The girl is just being way too considerate. He listens quietly, finally seeing the situation from a different angle. Marl adds that while she tries to hide it, Lucana is clearly forcing herself to act that way. It hits him that she's only 7 years old, an age when most kids are throwing tantrums or asking for everything they see. Instead, she's spent her life surrounded by people who made her feel like she had to lock her emotions away just to be accepted. He wonders if any of the adults are even paying attention, especially her father, Lord Rayleigh. Thinking about it just makes him angry. He can't stand the idea of her suffering in silence while everyone around her does nothing. Clenching his fist, he feels a surge of frustration because he wants to be a hero but can't even save a single girl. Tiny bolts of lightning crackle around his hand until Marl calls his name, pulling him out of his head. He blinks in surprise, the sharp glare in his eyes softening as he realizes he's making a scene. With a long, tired sigh, he slumps forward and tries to rein in his leaking magic, feeling pathetic for losing his cool. After a moment of silence, he quietly thanks Marl for the talk, which she accepts with a bright, playful bow. She gives his head a playful pat, telling him he's being way too serious for his own age. If he keeps making such a scary face, he'll just end up making girls uncomfortable. Since they only just met, she suggests taking things slow and closing the distance one step at a time. He looks up in surprise, realizing the date had completely slipped his mind. As they chat, she points out that his 8th birthday is actually right around the corner. Marl explains that girls live for big events and sweets, though the logic leaves him a bit puzzled. The idea finally clicks for Sizzle, and he looks at her with wide eyes. Marl nods along, looking pretty proud of her advice. He starts wondering if she's actually some kind of genius. Leaning back, she tells him to leave this sort of thing to her. Suddenly, he's back on his feet. He can't just sit here moping when there's a mountain of prep work to do. Without another word, he bolts out of the room to get started. Marl waves him off with a grin, happy to see that spark back in his eyes. She's just relieved he's finally acting like his old self again. Glenn and Lucana catch up with him at the party to offer their best wishes. He responds with a huge grin, thanking them for the kind words. Leading the way, he gestures for them to follow him toward the food tables. Since it's a special occasion, he decided on a buffet style where even the servants can join in. His father looks a bit surprised by the casual setup, but says he'll greet the other guests later. As the party gets moving, the head chef leans in to ask if Shizuru is really okay with such a small event. He gives a simple nod, figuring a massive crowd would just make Lucana feel overwhelmed. This doesn't sit well with the kitchen staff, who look pretty frustrated about missing their chance to go all out, leaving Shizuru to offer a sheepish apology. Nearby, a rowdy guest lets out a loud laugh, noting that the family is usually seen as a headache to deal with. While Glenn takes the comment with a tired look, Shizuru just encourages everyone to enjoy the day before the chef bows and heads back to work. As the celebration kicks off, the whole room feels alive, with everyone digging into the food and chatting. Watching the scene, Shizuru feels confident that going with a casual buffet was the right call for the staff to relax. He suddenly spots the head chef lingering at the edge of the room with a worried expression. The old man apologizes with a bashful look, admitting he was so nervous about the feedback that he couldn't help but watch. He stays quiet as Glenn takes a bite, curious to see the reaction to these new dishes. Beside him, Lucana digs in as well, covering her mouth in surprise. She looks completely stunned by the flavor. Seeing them enjoy it, Shizuru cheers while the chef finally lets out a long sigh of relief. The old man tells him that these new menu ideas were a massive success. Shizuru just shakes his head, insisting it was the chef's talent that really did the work. Deep down, he admits he just really missed the food from his previous life. Using his fuzzy memories, he worked with the chefs to recreate those flavors until they became official house recipes. He gives his father a quick nod, saying it's finally time for the special surprise. Glenn smiles back and calls for the next course. Just then, the doors slide open as the servants wheel in a heavy cart. It's a glittering display of sweets, from fancy tiered cakes to rows of colorful cookies. The room goes quiet for a second while everyone takes in the sugar-filled spread. Shizuru breaks the silence by asking Lucana if she'd like to have her dessert out on the balcony. Watching them closely, Glenn gives a knowing look while Lucana keeps her head down. He tells her it's a rare chance to relax and encourages her to accept the invitation. Once they get outside, Shizuru pulls out a chair for her like a complete gentleman. Lucana freezes on the spot, her eyes going wide at the gesture. She starts to panic internally, wondering if someone like her actually deserves this much kindness. Shizuru breaks the tension by asking if the food was actually to her liking. Lucana can barely get the words out, looking completely flustered as she tries to answer. She eventually admits she was just surprised because everything on the menu was so new to her. Hearing that makes him light up. With a confident grin, he reaches for the platter and promises that the dessert is the real highlight. He lifts the lid to reveal a spread of classic modern treats, from cheesecake to a perfect-looking pudding topped with a cherry. Lucana stares at the table in total awe, her eyes practically sparkling at the sight. Shizuru picks up a cookie and mentions he actually helped bake these himself before offering her a bite. Staring at the treat, Lucana freezes up as her face turns bright red from the shock. When she hesitates, he starts to worry that trying to feed her directly was a bit too much, but she quickly explains she just isn't used to such a bold gesture in public. He looks around the empty balcony and reminds her that no one is even watching. Unbeknownst to them, Marl is peeking through the door and rooting for him from the shadows, a fact he realizes the second he catches her eye. She scans the room, clearly feeling those prying eyes from earlier. Once she thinks the coast is clear, she takes a big bite and hums with joy. Swallowing the treat, she looks at him and admits it's actually delicious. He lets out a silent victory cheer, thrilled that his modern recipe hit the mark. Eager to keep the momentum going, he holds out a spoonful of pudding and asks her to try this one too. She starts to panic, stammering that she can definitely handle the spoon herself. Turning on the charm, he looks up at her with a pouty face and asks if he really can't be the one to feed her. Unable to resist, she finally gives in and takes a bite of the pudding. She admits the flavor is actually incredible, her face lighting up at the first taste of the dessert. When he goes to scoop up more, she just stares at the spoon with wide, sparkling eyes, completely caught up in the moment. Just seeing her this happy makes all his hard work in the kitchen feel worth it. It's a successful mission, and even the people peeking from the hallway seem to agree. He holds it out for her again with a happy grin, clearly winning her over. Lucana calls him a bit of a meanie for teasing her, but she keeps munching anyway. He just plays innocent while she finished her treat and savors the flavor. Giving him a polite bow, she admits she was pretty embarrassed to be fed, but it was still delicious. Soon, her attention shifts toward the night sky with sparkling eyes. Gazing at the moonlit estate, she whispers about how beautiful the whole night is. Suddenly she looks away, apologizing for being the one getting pampered when it's actually his birthday. He reminds her that he's the one who chose to do this, so she really doesn't need to feel bad. Surprised by the sudden mood shift, Chizuru asks what she's even sorry for. He finds himself just staring, struck by how genuine she looks in the moonlight. Closing her eyes with a soft smile, she admits that she's having a truly wonderful time. He keeps his eyes on her for a moment, soaking in the quiet of the balcony. Breaking the silence, he perks up and promises to have an even better treat ready for their next meeting. She offers a soft, blushing smile and admits she's already looking forward to it. The two of them turn back to the stars, finishing his birthday party in the calm of the night. Since the party ended, life at the estate has finally settled back into a quiet routine. He sits alone in the lounge, looking a bit thoughtful as the house goes back to normal. Marl stops her cleaning to wonder aloud if Lucina is doing okay. She sighs, admitting it's a bit of a letdown since the two of them were getting along so well. Shutting his book, he reminds her that the visit was never meant to last. It turns out their home is just a convenient stop on the way to the Rufus territory. He mentions that she promised to visit on her way back, so they'll definitely see her again soon. Still, he admits to a pouty Marl that the house feels a bit lonely without their guest. Looking down for a moment, he figures there is no point in staying depressed. He just needs a good distraction to keep his mind busy. With a bright grin, he announces that it's time to throw himself back into special training. While Marl complains that he isn't acting sad at all, he reflects on how the birthday party finally brought him and Lucina closer. Marl gives him a knowing smile, noticing how happy he's been lately. She casually mentions that he doesn't have to do his secret magic training in private anymore. As the realization sinks in, Sizzle freezes, realizing he wasn't as sneaky as he thought. It turns out his father finally convinced his mother to let him use magic openly. He still has some rules to follow, but he's just glad he no longer has to hide his powers. With a bright expression, he tells Marl that he's even been cleared for real combat in the demon forest, as long as he brings guards along. Marl turns her back and keeps cleaning with a cold, polite reply. Seeing the cold shoulder, Sizzle tentatively asks if she is mad at him. She insists she isn't mad while venting about how he ignored her warnings, radiating a dark energy that says the exact opposite. Realizing he definitely messed up, he hangs his head and gives her a genuine apology. She just stares at him for a second, letting the silence hang. Eventually, she softens up and admits she is only worried, though she figures he will probably be fine anyway. He starts rambling about how well he's handling the spirits, but in his excitement, he slips up and mentions he's been using magic for 8 years. He freezes the second the words leave his mouth, realizing he just outed himself as a secret prodigy. Scrambling for an excuse, he mumbles something about catching a bee to cover his tracks, though he looks incredibly guilty. Marl thus gives him a long, suspicious look that says she isn't buying a word of it. Still, she decides to let it go for now and leaves the room, warning him not to do anything too reckless. Once the door shuts, he finally lets out a breath, knowing he barely dodged a major headache. If people knew he'd been training since he was a toddler, the whole house would be in an uproar. Luckily, he is alone now and can finally get hyped about getting some real combat experience. Thinking about the upcoming action has him grinning and punching the air. Hearing footsteps outside, he turns toward the door, figuring Marl must have forgotten something. Suddenly, the door flies open and his older brother, Homura, charges in with a loud greeting. Sizzle stares in shock, wondering what he is doing here. Homura is a bit offended that Sizzle isn't more excited to see him, even if he is just home on summer break. As the family's eldest son and future Marquis, he usually spends most of his time living away at a magic academy. Leaning in with a sharp look in his eye, He mentions he heard a very interesting rumor. When he finds out Sizzle is headed to the demon forest, he gets fired up and demands to go too. Sizzle points out that his brother should be heading back to school soon, but Homura ain't worried about a little delay. Leaning in with a big grin, he insists they're a team and should do everything together. Then Sizzle brings up the last time they teamed up, when he was left behind as a decoy while his brother escaped. Instead of feeling guilty, he just laughs and says getting caught is the loser's own fault, looking exactly like their arrogant father. Sizzle lets out a heavy sigh at the attitude, realizing that despite their messy family ties, they actually get along okay. Seeing no other choice, he decides to give in. He tells his brother it's fine, but only if he can get their mother to agree to it first. Not waiting for another word, the older brother zooms out of the room with a shout of joy. Sizzle just watches him go, figuring there's absolutely no way she say yes. To his surprise, his brother is back sooner than expected with a stunned expression. He comes sprinting over in a great mood, leaving Sizzle wondering if he actually managed to get the green light. Instead of a yes, he cheerfully suggests they should just run away from home. Sizzle stares at him in disbelief, stunned that he'd treat a serious runaway plan like an invitation to play catch. Apparently, their mother shut him down because of his school duties and his role as the future heir. Since he didn't get his way, the older brother figures they should just use brute force to break out. He is clearly excited about the idea, grinning as he calls it a long overdue prison break. Sizzle's expression goes cold as he prepares to shut the idea down. He gives a flat refusal and holds his ground, using a lightning boost to stay rooted in place. His brother tries to shove him, but Sizzle doesn't budge an inch. Homura's eyes go wide as he realizes his little brother is using physical strengthening magic too. Instead of being annoyed, he looks impressed by the sudden display of power. Looking back, Sizzle points out that since Homura is 5 years older, this whole pushy routine is actually pretty childish. He figures his brother already has plenty of natural strength without needing to cheat with magic. Realizing his sarcasm isn't landing at all, he finally gives in and drops his guard. He admits to himself that there is no way he can win a debate against someone this stubborn. This makes his brother think he has finally won the argument, but Sizzle still has conditions. He asks if there is an actual plan to sneak out, or if they are just going to try and bash their way through the front gate. He happily confirms that's exactly the plan, suggesting they just knock out the guards and bolt. Shooting the idea down immediately, Sizzle points out they would be found and dragged back in seconds. When Homura just laughs and says he'll keep fighting until they win, Sizzle realizes he needs to take charge. Rubbing his forehead, he tells his brother he has a much better alternative, which immediately catches his attention. Instead, he proposes they sneak past the guards entirely to avoid being chased, figuring they can just make up an excuse later. Homura listens with wide eyes, looking genuinely impressed by the idea of a secret mission. He suggests they move separately and just meet up at the forest entrance once they're both clear. He warns that if one of them gets caught, they have to keep quiet about being accomplices to avoid a total house lockdown. Giving a polite smile, he says that should be easy enough for someone as capable as his big brother. Homura is all in, confidently telling him to leave the heavy lifting to the experts. With the plan settled, he heads out first to get the mission started. Sizzle just waves him off, wishing him luck as he disappears down the hall. Once the door clicks shut, he finally has some peace and quiet to himself. He settles onto the couch with a book and a hot cup of tea, looking completely relaxed. Suddenly, a bunch of shouting echoes from the hallway, and he recognizes his brother's voice immediately. Hearing the sounds of a struggle, he sighs, realizing his brother got caught way faster than expected. He explains that he has nothing to gain from a risky escape right now, since he doesn't want to get his own privileges revoked. Taking a calm sip of his tea, he admits he feels a little bit like the bad guy for letting his brother go it alone. Marl cleans up the room, wondering out loud if Lady Rukina is doing well back at home. Letting out a heavy sigh, she admits it's a shame the girl had to leave right when she and Sizzle were starting to hit it off. Still, Sizzle shuts his book and explains they were only ever a stopover between the Lorelei and Rufus family lands anyway. He reminds her that Rukina promised a visit on the way back, so they'll definitely see her again soon. Even so, he admits he's feeling a bit lonely himself. Thinking back to the birthday party, he figures she finally started to open up to him, just a little bit. Either way, there is no sense in sitting around being depressed. Shouting with a grin, he decides to throw all his energy into special training, leaving Marl to complain about how quickly he bounced back. Marl notices how cheerful he's been lately and mentions he won't have to sneak around for magic practice anymore. She lets out a laugh, admitting she knew about his secret training the entire time. Hearing this, he just freezes, realizing his top secret sessions weren't actually a secret at all. Because his father finally talked his mother into it, he can now use magic openly without hiding in the shadows. There are still some rules, but it's a huge step up from before. Excitedly, he tells Marl that he even got permission for combat training in the Forest of Magic. Of course, he'll have a few guards tagging along, but he's finally getting exactly what he wanted. He has the official green light. But there's still one problem. Marl is currently giving him the silent treatment while she cleans. When he nervously asks if she's upset, she hits him with a very polite denial, listing every safety warning he ignored. The massive text in the background makes it pretty clear that even if she says she's fine, she's actually fuming. Feeling the pressure, he quickly offers a sincere apology to try and smooth things over. Marl finally lets out a sigh and explains she wasn't truly mad, just incredibly worried about his safety. She tells him she knows he'll be just fine anyway, letting the awkward tension in the room finally melt away. He gets a little too comfortable and accidentally mentions he's been using magic for 8 years already. Realizing the mistake immediately, his face goes pale. Marl repeats the number back with a suspicious look, forcing him to backpedal and claim he was just talking about catching a bee. She narrows her eyes at him, clearly not buying the excuse for a second. Eventually, she gives him one final warning to stay safe and heads out. He breathes a massive sigh of relief, but the close call serves as a reminder of how dangerous his secret really is. He pushes the worrying aside and starts getting hyped for his first real taste of combat. Suddenly, loud footsteps echo from the hallway. Instead, Homura bursts into the room with a loud shout and a wave. He freezes on the spot, completely blindsided by his brother's sudden appearance. Figuring the maid forgot something, he turns back toward the door and calls her name. Homura stands there with a confident grin, acting like the proud heir to the Volume Blaze family. Normally, he stays in a dormitory at a magic academy, but he's clearly back home for a visit. Shaking his head, he scolds his brother for being so cold to his own flesh and blood and reminds him that summer break ain't over yet. Suddenly, his look shifts into a mischievous glare as he mentions he heard a very interesting rumor about what the kid has been up to. Since he knows Sizzle is finally allowed into the Forest of Magic, he starts yelling about how unfair it is. He grabs the boy by the shoulder and demands to be taken along for the training. Sizzle isn't so sure about the idea, suggesting it's probably better if his brother just heads back to the academy dorms. Waving the concern away, Homura insists that extending his vacation for a few days won't hurt anyone. He's all in on the idea of the Volume Blaze brothers sticking together for everything. Sizzle brings up a sore subject, reminding him of the time he was used as a distraction and left behind during a past escape attempt. Instead of apologizing, the older boy just laughs and says getting caught is the only real crime. Sizzle sighs, noticing his brother has inherited their father's exact same pushy attitude. He lets out a massive sigh, figuring there is no use fighting it. Even if they have different mothers, they've always managed to get along well enough. Still, he isn't making it easy, so he tells Homura he can only come if he gets permission from their mother first. As his brother cheers, Sizzle just watches him, feeling certain that getting the okay is actually impossible. But it isn't long before he sees Homura approaching with a huge grin, making him wonder if he really pulled it off. His brother waves him over with a loud shout, looking like he's ready to head out to the forest right now. He cheerfully suggests they just run away from home, acting like he's just asking to play a casual game of catch. Grinning, he explains their mom didn't actually give him the green light since he's the heir and needs to focus on school. Since permission is off the table, he decides they just need to break out by force. With a mischievous look, he suggests they stage a great escape together, less like the old days. Sizzle doesn't even hesitate and shuts him down with a flat no. Just then, his brother lunges out and grabs his hand. Even with his lightning boost active, he's shocked to find the grip won't budge an inch. He realizes his brother is using physical reinforcement magic too, which explains why the grip is so solid. Between the 5-year age gap and the raw physical difference, he figures there's no point in struggling anymore. Giving up for now, he admits he just can't win this fight. Homura is thrilled to have him on board, but Sizzle asks if he actually has a plan for the escape or if he's just counting on brute force. He proudly admits his strategy is basically us knocking out the guards and making a run for it. Shaking his head, Sizzle shuts the idea down, arguing they'll be found instantly if they start a fight. He can't believe his brother is such a total muscle brain. Since brute force is out, he tells him he has a much better way to handle this. He suggests they move without being seen to avoid a search party, figuring they can just trick the staff later if things go south. Still, the idea of a stealth mission actually appeals to Homura's sense of adventure. Sizzle suggests they move individually and meet at the forest entrance, stressing that if one of them is caught, they can't snitch on the other. He adds a bit of flattery, saying a simple stealth mission should be easy for someone as skilled as his brother. Homura practically glows with pride, telling him to leave everything to him as long as he doesn't get spotted. With the plan set, he waves and starts sprinting off to take the lead. Sizzle watches him go, offering a silent wish for his safety. He heads back inside and shuts the door to his room. Settling onto the sofa, he picks up a book and a cup of tea, looking like he's been there for hours. Suddenly, a loud commotion echoes through the hallway, and Sizzle recognizes his brother's voice right away. When shouts of "Let me go" fill the air, he just sighs at how fast his brother got spotted. He figures that running away would only get his own travel privileges revoked, so he decides to stay behind. Offering a silent apology to his brother, he admits he was using him as a sacrificial pawn. Still, taking a sip of tea, he realizes he might be a bit of a villain. After finishing his tea, he eventually makes his way to the edge of the demon forest. While a knight reminds him to stay close, he barely pays any attention to the warnings. His first real battle is finally within reach. Suddenly, his brother starts yelling at him to pick up the pace, looking way too excited for a simple drill. Looking back, he realizes Homura is actually going through with this, despite the mess with Elizabeth's permission. One of the guards stares Sizzle down, asking if he was actually in on Homura's little scheme. He immediately starts sweating, swearing he doesn't know anything about it. While he tries to play it cool, Homura doesn't help at all by puffing out his chest and bragging about how they successfully snuck away that morning. Leaning in close, the older brother even apologizes for getting caught, promising he hasn't breathed a word about their secret yet. Sizzle can feel the guard's eyes digging into him as he desperately begs his brother to just stop talking. Homura ignores the awkward vibe and shouts about finally starting the mission. Sizzle just lets out a tired sigh, figuring he's stuck with his brother's noisy energy all day. Suddenly, his expression shifts as a sneaky thought crosses his mind. Addressing the guards, he points out that their top priority should be protecting Homura since he's the family's precious heir. Before anyone can react, he bolts into the thicket and disappears. The knights are left shouting his name in total shock as he finally makes his escape. Sparking with blue light, his fingers tap into a hidden well of power to boost his speed. He flashes a wide, excited grin now that he is finally on his own, clearly thrilled to be starting his own adventure. They are left staring at the empty path, completely baffled by how the kid just vanished into thin air. Seeing his brother bolt, Homura tries to chase after him while shouting that he is coming along too. He's already deep in the woods, putting plenty of distance between himself and the confused guards. Even though he always planned on ditching them, he figures Homura's loud mouth made the escape much easier. Suddenly, he senses a tiny flicker of magic nearby. Peering through the thick branches, he pinpoints exactly where the energy is coming from. He's glad he used his radar magic to scout ahead, since it makes finding these specific monster dens a lot simpler. Sizzle stops at the edge of a clearing, certain that a pack of monsters is lurking nearby. Skidding to a halt, he takes a second to look around the empty woods. Suddenly, a loud rustle comes from the thick bushes right behind him. He glances back in a panic, wondering if his brother somehow managed to chase him down already. But he knows that's impossible, which means something else is hiding in the leaves. Suddenly, a goblin steps out from the brush, catching him completely off guard. He freezes on the spot, staring at the wrinkled green skin and pointed ears of a real monster. The creature lets out a shrill cackle, its sharp claws looking far more lethal than anything he's faced in practice. Standing just a few feet away, he realizes this isn't a training exercise anymore. When their eyes meet, he doesn't see any humanity or logic, just the raw urge to kill. He stares back, realizing this is what real combat actually feels like. Suddenly lunging forward with a screech, the monster forces him to scramble as the real fight finally begins. Despite the danger, he's actually excited, weighing whether to use his sword or his bow for this first kill. The creature doesn't give him much time to choose. Letting out a sharp, guttural growling noise, the goblin lashes out with a massive, jagged swipe that nearly catches him off guard. He ducks just in time, narrowly avoiding a hit as the monster's claw grazes the air above his head. Panting slightly, he realizes that overthinking in the middle of a life-or-death struggle is a recipe for disaster. Still, he figures it's a good lesson to learn early. His eyes sharpen as he prepares to move, ready to finally stop testing the waters and get serious. He hears more rustling in the brush and snaps his attention toward the noise. Scanning the trees, he realizes he's actually surrounded by goblins. He does a quick head count and figures there are about 20 of them closing in. Instead of panicking, a tiny smirk plays on his lips. Facing the entire pack alone, he calmly wonders how he should handle his first real battle. By the time the knights finally catch up, the fight is long over and Sizzle is standing in the middle of a pile of monsters. Staring at the carnage and the blood on his face, the men freeze in total shock. One of them shouts out in a panic, asking if he's been hurt. He just turns around with a bright, cheerful smile and tells them he's perfectly fine. As it turns out, none of the blood belongs to him, it's just some leftover spray from the pack he finished off. One of the knights stares at the pile of bodies, unable to believe a kid could really do this. He just nods and confirms it was him, acting like the whole massacre is just another Tuesday, while the guards struggle to process the scale of it. After giving himself a quick mental pat on the back, he suddenly stops and senses something in the distance. He notices the number of monsters in the area is dropping at an impossible speed, as if they're all being wiped out at once. It feels like a massive force is just clearing the forest floor for him. Snapping back to the group, he asks where his brother went, but the knights only give him an awkward, worried look. One of the knights admits that Homura actually ditched them and vanished into the trees a while ago. Realizing his brother is the one clearing the forest, Sizzle points ahead and tells the group to follow him immediately. The guards watch him lead the way, remarking on how dependable he is for an 8-year-old. They figure he must be deeply worried about his sibling, even though the two have different mothers. But the kid isn't rushing because he's scared for his brother's life. He's actually just panicking that Homura is going to steal all the best monster kills for himself. That race comes to a sudden halt as one of the guards yells for everyone to stop. He freezes mid-step, his eyes widening as he senses a massive presence nearby. The knights rush to regroup, quickly thanking him for his help in the previous scuffle. But their relief doesn't last long when a hulking ogre looms over them, draped in heavy chains and looking for a fight. One of the knights breaks out in a cold sweat, admitting that even with 3 of them, they don't stand a chance. Looking over at each other, They silently agree that things are about as bad as they get. Because they're knights of the Full Blaze family, they decide to put everything on the line just to get Sizzle to safety. A unified battle cry goes up as they pump their fists to find some courage. Surprisingly, Sizzle joins in on the shout with a huge grin, which completely kills the tragic mood. One of the knights nearly trips, wondering why the kid he's trying to save is acting like he's ready to lead the charge. He reaches out and triggers a sudden surge of electricity. Clapping his hands with a bright smile, he explains it's a thunder barrier designed to keep them safe. Before the knights can even blink, jagged bolts encircle them and lock them in a shimmering dome. Then he just turns and sprints toward the ogre, figuring he can finish things faster without any interruptions. The knights scream for him to stop, but he doesn't even look back as he crosses the distance. The monster watches him approach with a cold, hungry stare. Instead of shaking with fear, he looks incredibly focused, telling the beast he's been waiting for them to be alone together at last. Facing the massive creature head-on, he calmly suggests they finally get this fight started. Suddenly, Homura drops in from above, slamming his blade into the monster with a loud shout. He clearly wasn't going to let his little brother take all the credit. Frozen on the spot, Sizzle can't believe his solo duel just got crashed. The heroics don't last long, though, as Homura immediately starts nursing his hand and complaining about how hard the ogre's skin is. Sizzle just sighs, telling his brother he really ruined the vibe of his big entrance. Even as his brother tries to act cool, the kid just stares at him with total disappointment. Sizzle suggests that since his brother already had his turn, he should step aside and let his cute little brother handle the rest. With a cocky smirk, Homura claims he's barely even warmed up yet and tells the kid to just stay behind his back. Watching from the safety of the barrier, the knights can only beg them to stop bickering while a literal monster is standing right there. The ogre lets out a low, gravelly growl, clearly done being ignored. It looms over the two of them, tightening its grip as it finally prepares to strike. They're shaking, knowing they need to run before things get even worse. Seeing a chance to finally settle their argument, he tells his brother that whoever kills this ogre first gets first dibs on the next big target. Instead of panicking like the guards, the two brothers treat the situation like a festival, with Sizzle cheering as the battle begins. Staring down the massive beast, Homura just grins and agrees to the deal. The knights recognize the monster's roar and realize it's an apex predator that usually stays much deeper in the woods. The knights follow the sound of the fight and burst through the trees. Spotting Sizzle up ahead, they call out in relief, though their voices quickly trail off. The mangled bodies littering the grass leave them staring in silent disbelief. He stands right in the middle of the carnage, looking as calm as if he had just gone for a stroll. Seeing how worried they look, he turns around with a bright smile and wipes a bit of blood from his cheek. He assures them he isn't actually wounded and says the blood is just from the enemies he took down. One of the knights stares at the pile of goblin corpses, wondering if Sizzle really took out this many all by himself. He confirms it with a calm smile, noting that a massive wave of monsters seems to be pushing into the forest. Closing his eyes for a second, he tries to get a better feel for the surrounding area. To his surprise, he senses the monster count nearby dropping at a crazy speed, as if someone else is wiping them out. The sudden shift in the forest's energy catches him completely off guard. Thinking of the only person who'd be that reckless, he asks where his brother ran off to. Sizzle points the way, telling the guards that his brother is just up ahead. One soldier finally realizes that Homura must be the one responsible for the sudden monster massacre. He isn't far off, shouting with joy as he charges through the brush. Watching Sizzle's calm lead, the men think it's sweet how much he cares about his family at only 8 years old. Since they have different mothers, they figure the two are closer than most siblings. In reality, Homura is actually just panicking because he's terrified his brother will swoop in and steal all his prey. But that panic spreads to the whole group when they suddenly have to skid to a halt. Someone yells for everyone to stop before they run right into trouble. Sizzle looks up with wide eyes, realizing the situation Unless got a lot more serious. Turning to the group, he asks if they're holding it together, and they admit they're only safe because of his protection. Standing right in their path is the monster they've been sensing. A massive, chained ogre looms over them, finally showing its face. One of the knights stares at the beast, sweating as he realizes they don't stand a chance even if they all fight together. Looking over at his comrades, he makes sure they're all on the same page about what needs to happen next. They decide to trade their lives just so Sizzle can get away, figuring that's their duty as 4 Blaze Knights. Just then, they let out a unified roar and raise their fists to seal the deal. Hopping into the middle of the circle, Sizzle admits he's always wanted to join a dramatic huddle like this. The guy tells him to just stay still and let them be heroic for a second. Instead of listening, he reaches down and taps the ground. Lightning instantly surges up around the knights, catching them completely off guard. Smiling brightly, Sizzle explains that he's putting up a thunder barrier to keep them safe. For now, they just need to stay inside the zone while he handles business. Before they can even argue, he bolts toward the ogre. The knights are left frozen in shock as they realize he's going in alone to make sure nobody gets in his way. One of the knights yells for him to stop, but it's way too late for that. Looking up at the monster, he admits he's actually glad they are finally alone for a real fight. The ogre glares down with cold eyes, yet Sizzle doesn't even flinch as he keeps closing the distance. He stands his ground against the massive, chained beast and tells it that it's time to get started. Just as the showdown begins, Homura drops from the sky and slams his blade into the beast. Sizzle watches the impact in total silence, his eyes wide as his perfect duel gets ruined. Instead of a heroic follow-up, his brother pulls back to nurse his stinging hand and complain about the monster's tough hide. Still feeling the embarrassment, Sizzle tells him to read the room and let him have his dramatic moment in peace. Pointing at the blood, Homura suggests that his brother has had enough fun and should let him take over. Shaking his head, he tells the kid to just stay quiet and watch from behind. Watching the two of them bicker, the knights beg them to actually focus on the giant monster in front of them. The beast lets out a low growl, clearly tired of being ignored while they chat. Snarling, it reveals rows of sharp teeth as it prepares to strike. It looks like the talking is finally over. Suddenly, a massive roar shakes the entire forest, making everyone freeze in place. The knights recognize the sound immediately and start to panic, realizing they're up against something on a whole different level. Ignoring the panic, Sizzle just looks back with a bored expression. He proposes a little contest to see who can take down the ogre first, and Homura is all in. Since the giant beast is already looming right behind them, they figure it's the perfect time for a bet. Sizzle immediately points into the distance, shouting for his brother to look at something. Before his brother can even turn his head, Sizzle bolts toward the target. Realizing he just fell for the same trick again, Homura lets out a frustrated yell. He knows he can't compete with his brother's raw power. Still, he figures he has the clear advantage when it comes to speed. The ogre roars in his face, but he doesn't slow down for a second. He leaps high into the air, declaring he's the one in the lead. Smirking at the competition, Homura claims the win is already his. Sizzle doesn't seem discouraged, letting out a quick shout as he finds an opening. Readying his next move, he prepares to unleash a strike that might just turn the tables. A massive blade suddenly whistles through the air and slams deep into the ogre's shoulder. He recognizes it instantly. It's his brother's weapon. Landing nearby, he looks at the sword in disbelief, wondering how anyone could throw something that heavy from such a distance. Homura trots over with a huge grin and yanks the blade free, while Sizzle calls him a muscle-brained idiot for the reckless move. Still, he just keeps that cocky smile, clearly enjoying the win. With that same cocky smile, Homura steps right up to the massive monster and calls dibs on the fight. While the knights realize this is a mutated high ogre and start shaking, Sizzle just sighs, already done with his brother's attitude. Suddenly, a loud rustling comes from the bushes nearby. Ignoring the knight's warnings to stay back, he decides to handle the pack of wild dogs that was lured in by the scent of blood. He starts by gathering sparks of electricity between his hands, forming a massive bow made of pure light. The dogs lunge from the shadows, barking and snarling as they try to close the distance. Instead of firing an arrow, he suddenly shifts the magic into a long spear and drives it through the first wave. Watching from the sidelines, the knights are completely speechless as they realize he really meant it about going solo. Sizzle keeps the momentum going, morphing his lightning into a heavy axe to smash the remaining beasts before deciding what to try next. He looks over the smoking remains, realizing his big lightning bolts are too risky in a dense forest. One stray spark could set the whole place on fire, so he figures it's safer to stick with close-range weapon shapes for now. Glancing over his shoulder, he watches the chaos of the main battle. Before he can even finish the thought, the knights nearby start panicking and screaming for him to look behind him. A massive, snarling beast towers over him, looking way more dangerous than the small fry he just wiped out. The guards yell for him to run, but this is exactly the kind of toy he was hoping for. Seeing Homura go all out against the high ogre makes him a little jealous. It actually looks like a blast, and he wonders when he'll get a tough opponent that can actually push him. He beams with pure excitement, shouting that he finally found another one. Behind him, the guards just watch in disbelief as they recognize that look on his face, the look of a kid who just found a brand new toy. The beast looms over them with a jagged grin, appearing more interested in messing with its prey than finishing them off. Narrowing his eyes, he notices the creature's smug attitude. Then again, he figures he's not exactly one to talk. The beast doesn't wait for an invitation and lunges straight at him with its claws out. Watching the monster close the distance, Sizzle wonders which weapon would be the most fun to use on this thing. He finally picks his favorite, shouting that this is the one as lightning erupts in every direction. The guards are frozen where they stand, unable to even process the massive amount of energy coming off the kid. Instead of backing away, he meets the monster's massive fist with his own tiny hand. The beast looks completely stunned that its strike was actually stopped. Not even flinching, he focuses every bit of that lightning into their point of contact. Then, a sharp crackle of thunder sends the monster reeling as the kid's power finally explodes. The smoke clears to show Sizzle just standing there, facing down the massive beast. One of the knights calls out, terrified that the boy is being reckless and shouldn't be standing his ground. Sizzle isn't even breaking a sweat. He gives the monster a cool look and tells the creature it's actually weaker than his big brother. Sensing the atmosphere has changed, another guard tells him to look closer. The monster starts trembling, its massive frame shaking as it tries to recover from the shock. Right after that insult, Sizzle lands a heavy punch to the ogre's jaw, the lightning impact twisting its face. Pulling back, he doesn't even look winded as he asks the monster if they should finish this. He lands steady on a nearby rock, deciding it's finally time to wrap things up. He calls out his ultimate move, Flare Burst, and lets the lightning surge through the air. The energy builds to a breaking point, making the atmosphere around him heavy with static. Caught in the shadow of the blast, the beast can only stare in silence as the blinding light closes in. It's a complete whiteout for the guards, who are forced to shield their eyes as the ground begins to shake under the pressure. As the dust settles, Homura strolls over after finishing his own fight, noticing that things have finally quieted down on this side too. Glancing back, the younger brother wonders how his siblings' hunt went. Then they both look down at the remains of the monster, which is such a gory mess that it's actually been pixelated out. Sizzle admits the sight is pretty gross. Hearing that, Homura suppresses a laugh for a second. He jokes that the kid shouldn't be complaining when he's currently covered in soot and is a total charred mess. Finding the insult fair, Sizzle just laughs it off. He keeps laughing while the two of them head home, finally wrapping up the day's hunt. Inside, a young girl stares out the window as her companion sits in silence. Looking a bit flustered, she remarks that even if they're still kids, the full-braised brothers are honestly scary. Meanwhile, a carriage rumbles along the forest road, passing through the path the brothers just cleared. Back at the mansion, things are quiet as the family settles in for a formal dinner. Rukina seems completely lost in thought, staring blankly at her plate as the sound of silverware clinks in the background. Noticing her distant look, Sizzle calls out her name and gently asks if she's doing okay. She snaps back to reality and quickly apologizes, trying to play it off as she finally starts eating. Even so, he just watches her in silence, clearly sensing that something is bothering her. He thinks back to a few days ago when the carriage first pulled up to the estate. Running toward the wheels, he gives a big wave and asks how the visit went. Suddenly, he stops in his tracks, his excitement fading the second he gets a good look at her. Rukina looks completely drained, staring at the ground with hollow eyes while her father walks beside her. Her father apologizes to Sizzle, explaining that she's just worn out and needs the rest of the day to herself. Nodding politely, he tells her to take care, though he can't look away from her lifeless expression. He watches her walk off, convinced something happened at the Rufus estate to leave her looking so broken. Back in the present, he stares down at his dinner, unable to shake the feeling that he needs to help her. Later on, he pulls Marl aside to ask if she managed to find out what really happened to Rukina during her trip. She confirms that she got in touch with some of the servants over at the other family's estate. Instead of answering, she just looks down at the floor, her expression turning quiet and serious. The room stays still for a long moment until he eventually calls out her name. Sensing the heavy atmosphere, he urges her to just go ahead and tell him what she heard. Marl explains that the Rufus family refuses to acknowledge Rukina as their grandchild, even branding her with the cruel title of the unblessed princess. Hearing this, Sizzle is disgusted that grown adults could say such horrible things to a 7-year-old child. He grips his pants tightly, trying to keep his composure as the anger sets in. He can't help but feel that these people are pathetic for hurting her like this. Instead of dwelling on the anger, he focuses on Rukina and decides to make her feel better. They head out to a quiet gazebo in the garden where they can just relax in peace. Watching her for a moment, he mentions that she finally looks happy again. The comment catches her completely by surprise, making her heart skip a beat as she looks up with a blush. Quietly, she admits that he might be right. She mentions she only visited that family because she hoped to hear stories about her mother. He just watches her, finally understanding why she'd put up with them. It turns out her mother, a woman named Maria, was born with such a weak frame that having a child was considered impossible. Despite the risks, she pushed through the opposition to give her daughter life, passing away shortly after. She quickly tries to lighten the mood, stammering that she's still looking forward to seeing her grandparents. He gives a soft chuckle, seeing right through her nervous energy. Resting his chin on his palm, he casually mentions that he'd actually be pretty lonely if she ever left him. Her face turns bright red in a second as she stares at him, unable to even form a word. Seeing her reaction, he just laughs and tells her he's only kidding. Lucina pouts at him, asking him to please stop teasing her like that. Rubbing his head, he apologizes, though he quietly thinks to himself that he actually meant every word. He adds that he hopes they can keep talking like this for a long time to come. A soft breeze blows through the gazebo as she finally gives him a real, warm smile and promises she'd like that too. Thinking about that smile just makes him more upset about how much she had been looking forward to the trip. He looks completely frustrated, mentioning how unfair the whole situation is. Finally, he admits that seeing her like this reminds him of his own mother, and he realizes their situations are almost exactly the same. Mar watches him silently as he works himself up, but, as he thinks about it more, he realizes their situations are actually the complete opposite. While he gets to live a happy life as a celebrated miracle child, everyone around him is incredibly kind and supportive. Lucina has it much worse, losing her mother only to be branded with a cruel nickname and ignored by her own flesh and blood. She's basically living a life someone else picked out for her, forced to hide how she really feels. Sizzle stares at the floor, wondering if someone who grew up as spoiled as him can even help her. Marl stands quietly behind his chair, watching him sink into his thoughts. Breaking the silence, she lets out a small, knowing smile. She tells him there is absolutely something he can do to change things. She explains that if he really wants to help, he should just take her back to his side. Surprised by the blunt advice, he just blinks at her while trying to process what he is hearing. He repeats the idea under his breath, eyes wide as the weight of the suggestion finally hits him. He stares at Lucana, her face still heavy with that quiet sadness he's desperate to erase. As he thinks about pulling her into the light, he wonders if he's actually capable of changing her fate. His hands tremble slightly at the sheer weight of the choice. Seeing her from behind, she looks so small and isolated, like she's already given up on anything beyond these walls. Sizzle slumps into his chair, rubbing his face as the gravity of that idea sinks in. Seeing his reaction, Marl gets flustered and asks if she just said something completely out of line. He keeps his eyes covered for a long moment, letting the silence hang while he finally processes the suggestion. Then he looks up with a sudden grin, agreeing that it's exactly what he needs to do. He slaps his cheeks to psych himself up, finally ready to get moving. After thanking Marl for the advice, he starts heading for the door while she watches him, clearly confused. Stopping for a second, he realizes he almost forgot something important. Turning back, he flashes a huge, genuine smile and tells her that he really loves her. It's a sweet, honest moment that shows just how much he values her. The sudden compliment leaves her frozen in surprise for a moment. She eventually just giggles to herself, thinking he's still a bit of a handful like a younger brother. Sizzle arrives at the massive mansion the very next morning. Spotting Lucana, he gives her a bright greeting despite her usual gloomy expression. She blinks in surprise, clearly caught off guard by his energy. Walking right up to her, he offers a formal hello and acts like everything is perfectly normal. Still, she just stares back at him, wondering what he's planning. He leans in with a bright grin and tells her that breakfast won't be served here today. Blushing at how close he is, she asks where they should head instead. Instead of explaining, he reaches out and takes her hand in a firm grip. Leading her toward the exit, he says they're going this way while she stumbles behind him in shock. When she asks where they're even headed, he just keeps pulling her forward. He explains that they're going to sneak out through the front entrance today. Blankly repeating his words, she wonders if she actually heard him right. Nearby maids just watch with smiles, assuming the two are heading off for a nice breakfast together. Still, she notices the front gate is in the opposite direction of the dining hall. The maids finally snap out of it and realize he is heading straight for the exit. They look completely panicked as the truth hits them, shouting that it is already too late. Sizzle just keeps sprinting forward with a determined grin. Lucina can barely keep up, stumbling over her words as she is dragged along for the ride. Sizzle tells her she's sticking with him for the day, ignoring her confused stuttering. Then, he kicks his magic into high gear, activating a physical reinforcement boost that makes his body crackle with energy. Telling her to hold on tight, he pulls her in close while she stares at him in total shock. Before she can even ask what he's doing, he scoops her up into his arms. Apologizing for the rudeness, he holds her tight as she stares up at him, completely stunned. Her face goes bright red, and she can barely even stutter out his name. When she begs him to put her down, he just tells her no, reminding her that she promised to follow his lead. He launches them both high into the air, clearing the massive iron gates in a single bound with a playful shout. Looking up at him, Lucana can only stare in wonder as they soar over the walls and leave the estate behind. He pulls her in closer, wearing a calm smile as she lets out a little squeal of surprise. Once they touch down on the other side of the wall, he suggests it's finally time to head off. Meanwhile, the maids back at the estate slump over in defeat, realizing the kid really got one over on them. By then, the two have already made it to the fortress city of Galia, a massive border town tucked right against the mountains. The streets are bustling with life, filled with shops and people finally getting to enjoy the return of peace. As they weave through the market, she suddenly stops in her tracks and quietly calls his name. She asks if the new clothes look weird, tugging at her skirt with a shy blush. Chizuru doesn't hesitate for a second, giving her a huge grin and telling her it suits her perfectly. Watching from the counter, the shopkeeper can't help but chuckle at the pair. He mentions that while the boy usually sneaks out on his own, seeing him with the girl today is a real surprise. Laughing it off, he thanks the shopkeeper for always letting him store his spare clothes there. He gives a quick wave and tells Lucina it is finally time to head out. Suddenly, he stops in his tracks like he just remembered one last detail. As she stands there confused, he steps behind her and starts working on her hair, telling her to stay perfectly still. He finished the new look with a quick ponytail and declares it a job well done. Chizuru reminds her that since they're hiding their identities, they both need to look the part. When she asks about his own disguise, he realizes he almost forgot to change anything. Running a hand through his hair, he lets a little static electricity turn it into a wild, spiky mess. With the disguise complete, he offers his hand and suggests they stay close in the crowd. Lucina turns bright red and tries to hide her face, insisting she's perfectly fine walking on her own. Still, he warns her that the city is packed today and she could easily get lost. Looking out at the sea of people, she realizes he's probably right. She finally gives in and takes his hand, asking him to look after her. He just gives her a confident grin and tells her to leave it to him. She stays quiet, clearly feeling a little embarrassed by the closeness. As they push forward, he points out that the main street is just through the next section. Lucina's eyes go wide as they reach the main street. She admits she's never seen a crowd this big before. She scans the faces around her, noticing a specific feeling in the air. Looking at a smiling woman nearby, she points out how happy everyone seems. Chizuru agrees, reminding her that people can finally enjoy life now that the war with the demons is over. She looks over and spots a young family standing near one of the market stalls. Seeing her stop, he wonders what exactly has caught her attention. A little girl is tugging on her mother's sleeve, begging for a treat until the woman finally gives in with a sigh. As the child cheers over her win, he feels her grip on his hand tighten just a little bit. Watching the pair walk off, she seems completely moved by seeing the peace they fought for in person. As they walk, their fingers interlace into a firm, steady grip. Feeling the warmth of his hand, Lucina looks up with a soft, genuine smile. He catches her expression and can't help but grin back. He says it's time to head out, and she replies with a cheerful yes as they disappear into the crowd together. As they blend into the bustling street, Lucina suddenly stops and looks at him with a realization. She mentions how he called this an undercover trip earlier, but she's starting to suspect there's a deeper purpose behind it. With her eyes sparkling, she asks if this is actually one of those famous secret inspections of the city. To her, this isn't just a walk anymore, it's an official royal duty. Chizuru awkwardly looks away and admits that's exactly what it is, which is all the confirmation she needs to get even more excited. He pauses for a moment, clearly not expecting her to take his casual excuse so seriously. Still, she wonders if it's actually safe to be wandering around without a single guard. Normally, her life involves private carriages and shops that are completely cleared out before she even arrives. He just sighs, telling her that that kind of special treatment ruins the whole experience. Taking his point to heart, she figures a real inspection requires being side by side with the commoners. Chizuru gives her an encouraging nod, confirming she is absolutely right. Excited by the idea, she calls it a wonderful plan and insists on helping him for the rest of the day. A savory smell suddenly catches his nose. He suggests they start their inspection at a nearby food stall, and she happily follows his lead. Sizzling skewers of meat greet them at the counter. He casually orders 2 helpings of yakitori, while she stares at the stall like it's a foreign world. Recognizing him, the shopkeeper laughs and asks if he's finally out on a date with a cute girl. Still, she freezes in shock, offended that a commoner would talk to him with such little respect. Chizuru just smiles and stuffs a piece of grilled meat right into her mouth to shut her up. While she's busy chewing, he quickly shushes her, reminding her they're on a secret mission. The shopkeeper just laughs at the pair, noting how close they seem. Warning them both that the meat is hot, the man slides over the rest of the order. Chizuru reaches into his pouch to grab 2 copper coins, handling the bill for their first street snack. He drops the change into the vendor's palm as the man thanks him for the business. Chizuru figures it's a fair price for a quick snack and points out a spot where they can sit down. They head over to a nearby bench, and he passes Lucana her share. Instead of digging in, she just stares at the skewer in silent confusion. Seeing her hesitation, he asks if she just happens to hate chicken. She admits she's just stuck because there's no knife or fork to be found. Chizuru explains that she just needs to turn the stick sideways to eat it. Demonstrating with a massive bite, he tears into the meat with zero hesitation. He grins while chewing, telling her it's the best way to eat and wishing he had a cold beer to go with it. Lucana just stands there completely frozen, staring at him in silent disbelief. Realizing his mistake, he starts to sweat and figures he probably shouldn't have gone full barbarian in front of a noble lady. Still, she just glances around, noticing everyone else is eating the exact same way. Everywhere she looks, the crowd is casually munching on snacks without a single fork in sight. Gripping her skewer tight, she tells herself this must be the local etiquette. With a sudden burst of courage, she finally takes a big bite while he watches in surprise. Her eyes sparkle as the flavor hits her. It's like she just discovered a whole new world, and all her worries about manners disappear. She starts rambling about how the meat is perfectly crispy on the outside, but soft in the middle. With a big grin, he says he's just glad she finally found something she likes. Once they finish their snack, they both give a polite thanks for the meal. Moving further into the city, a crowded building nearby catches her eye. He follows her gaze and explains that's the local Adventurers Guild. He describes it as a place where people gather to hunt monsters and help those in trouble. When she asks if that's any different from the knights, he takes a second to think. According to him, knights serve the crown and the nobles, while adventurers focus on the regular folks. Hearing that makes her eyes sparkle as she decides it sounds like a wonderful job. He just gives a shaky laugh, knowing it's rarely as heroic as she's imagining. Just then, the ringing of distant bells echoes through the air, making her wonder what's happening. He listens for a moment and tells her the sound is coming from the church, probably for a wedding. Since she's never seen one before, her face lights up with pure wonder at the thought. Cheers and shouting soon drift over from the cathedral down the street. Seeing how interested she is, he asks if she wants to go take a look for herself. She doesn't even have to think it over. With a bright smile, she gives an enthusiastic yes and gets ready to move. They make it to the church just as the crowd starts cheering for the newly married couple. Clasping her hands, she stands there completely moved by the whole scene. As she watches them smile, she whispers about how beautiful and happy they look. He just gives a soft nod, letting her enjoy the moment. But while she's distracted, his expression shifts into something much more serious. He uses a light detection skill to scan the crowd, checking if anyone from her house followed them. Instead, he picks up 3 strange presences, a group of punks who clearly peg them as rich targets. He realizes Lucana's noble manners are just too obvious to hide, making her a walking target. To be sure, he closes his eyes and dials up the precision of his search. He's expecting to find some petty street thugs, but a massive weight suddenly hits his senses. Scanning the crowd with wide eyes, he tries to figure out exactly where the threat is hiding. Still, he pushes his search even further, desperate to find the source of this cold darkness. This isn't just a couple of punks. This pressure is coming from someone way more dangerous. He looks over at Lucana, wondering if the danger is hiding somewhere near her. Shaking his head, he realizes he was looking in the wrong direction the whole time. While she stands there smiling, totally unaware of the shift in the air, he focuses his senses on the ground at her feet. That's when he sees it. It isn't the crowd or the thugs after all. The darkness is her own shadow, which has grown a mass of terrifying, swirling eyes. Chizuru stares at her in silence, unable to wrap his head around what he's seeing. While the horror swirls below, she just stands there with a sweet smile. He watches her profile, wondering who or what she actually is. That dark mass at her feet keeps twisting and churning, moving more like a living thing than a simple reflection. Lucana is too distracted by her strawberry candy to notice his suspicion, calling it cute as she holds the snack up. Turning back with a big smile, she asks him to take a look at the treat. Chizuru glances down at the cobblestones and notices that the creepy shadow from before has completely vanished. Looking back at her, he wonders if that dark presence was actually some kind of spirit. He recalls how spirits usually follow a strict hierarchy, ranking from lower and middle tiers all the way up to the legendary great spirits. Thinking back to the high-level spirit his father once contracted, he tries to find a comparison point. Since that dark mass was clearly on a different level, he figures Lucana must be hosting something at the great spirit rank. Suddenly, her reputation as a princess without a blessing makes perfect sense. Chizuru wonders if he should even tell her about the shadow. He's worried that if the spirit overhears him, it might actually react badly. Seeing him totally spaced out, Lucana asks if something is wrong. He snaps back and fumbles for an excuse, claiming he's just jealous of her strawberry candy. She just stares at him for a moment, looking a little surprised by the sudden outburst. Since it's all just a hunch for now, he decides to keep his mouth shut and accepts the candy she offers him. Lucana leans in with the skewer, telling him to open wide. Seeing her so close catches him completely off guard. As his face turns bright red, she just giggles, explaining this is a little thank you for the birthday party. Watching her, he figures she has a surprisingly bold side. Giving in, he finally takes the bite. A rough voice interrupts that moment as a scarred man with a nasty grin looms over them, noticing right away that they're wearing some pretty expensive clothes. He's brought friends, too. 3 thugs surround the kids, already debating whether it's better to sell them off or just wait for a fat ransom check. While Lucana freezes in shock, Chizuru looks more annoyed than anything else. He lets the candy fall right out of his mouth, realizing he was so obsessed with the spirit shadow that he forgot to watch for regular criminals. He can't believe he let himself get distracted like this. It's a total waste of good candy. The fallen treat sits ignored as Lucana starts to tremble, clutching tightly at his sleeve. Seeing her terrified, he reaches out and calls her name softly. He gives her a gentle smile and a pat on the head, promising her everything is going to be all right. One of the thugs barks at them to shut up and move, but the boy just stares ahead with a strange, quiet confidence. He says he understands, looking down as his eyes go dark. Behind him, the thugs keep laughing, thinking they've already won. Suddenly, Chizuru snaps and shouts back. He launches a flying kick, slamming his thunder-charged boot straight into the thug's face. The impact sends the guy flying, leaving the rest of the gang in total shock. Chizuru glares at them with pure ice in his eyes, telling them that ruining his date was a huge mistake. Instead of backing down, the bald leader just gives a creepy smirk, figuring a noble brat is a lucky catch with a much bigger payday. Electricity starts arching off Chizuru's body as his eyes begin to glow white. Looking at the display, the leader has to admit that for a kid, this level of magic is actually the real deal. When one of the guys clutches his chest in pain, the others start to panic, realizing they've accidentally picked a fight with a noble. Before the leader can even react, the whole fight is over in a flash. Chizuru casually brushes the dust off his vest, figuring that was much easier than expected. Turning back to Lucana, he asks if she's okay and apologizes for the scare. She doesn't say a word at first, her shoulders just trembling in the quiet alley. Large tears start rolling down her face while she whispers his name. When she finally looks up, her eyes are sparkling with pure admiration for the boy who just saved her. She calls him incredible, comparing him to a knight from a storybook saving a princess. Hearing that makes him freeze up, his face turning bright red as he stammers out a thank you. It's a lot to take in, and he realizes getting a compliment from a girl feels way different than hearing it from family. Finally pulling himself together, he leads her away and leaves the tied-up kidnappers for the city guards to find. Chizuru asks if they can visit one more spot before the day is over as they walk through the quiet town. Checking the time, he suddenly looks panicked after realizing they're running way behind schedule. Lukina lets out a surprised gasp when he suddenly moves toward her. Before she can ask what's happening, he scoops her up bridal style and promises to get them there at high speed. She can only blush and agree, holding on tight as he prepares to bolt. They land at the castle lookout in a blur, and he finally lets her go. Leading her toward the ledge, he says they've finally made it to his favorite spot. Her eyes go wide as she takes in the massive view of the kingdom below. It's even more beautiful than she expected, and she stands there in total awe. The look on her face makes him smile, and he admits he's been wanting to bring her here for a long time. Looking out at the clouds, he mentions how a view like this makes all his worries just blow away. Lukina looks over in surprise, caught off guard by the idea of him having any problems at all. To her, he has always been that perfect genius everyone calls a once-in-a-thousand-year prodigy. Seeing her shock, he looks a bit sheepish and admits the rumors about him have really taken on a life of their own. As they stand together by the ledge, he reminds her he's still, and thus a human who deals with the same everyday struggles as anyone else. Lukina tilts her head, wondering why he's bringing up God all of a sudden. As he speaks, tiny sparks of electricity begin to crackle across his palm. He explains that he was gifted this power, and that it's the only lightning magic in the entire world. Mesmerized, she watches the energy dance across his skin. Looking up at him with a soft blush, she whispers that it's the most beautiful thing she's ever seen. He admits that, because his power came so easily, it used to feel like he was cheating compared to everyone else. Still, seeing how huge the world is has made him realize that moping around is just a waste of time. Clenching his fist, he tells her he's going to use his power for everything it's worth. He's determined to become the strongest magician the world has ever seen. He finished with a confident smile, clearly ready to stop living in his own head. He clenches his fist as the sparks fly, promising once and for all to become the world's strongest magician. As he looks down at Lukina, he waits for her reaction to such a bold claim. She starts with a quiet smile, simply telling him he can do it. Then she shouts it with everything she's got, leaving him blushing and completely caught off guard by her intensity. After her outburst, she settles down and reminds him that calling his magic a cheat is just being too hard on himself. He possesses more power than anyone, yet he stays humble and treats every person he meets as a total equal. Softening her expression, she admits she's the one who truly sees the hours he spends practicing in the shadows. While the world sees a natural genius, she has watched his constant effort and knows he earned every bit of his strength. Still, knowing his effort only makes her feel more inadequate. She admits she has no magic of her own, feeling like someone so useless doesn't deserve his kindness. The tears finally start falling as she tells him he's just a kind. Sizzle freezes on the spot, completely blindsided by her reaction. When she hides her face and starts sobbing, he begins to panic. He just flails his arms around, having no clue what he's supposed to do. Then a memory clicks of how his mother used to hold him whenever he cried at night. Hoping it works for her too, he pulls her into a tight hug and starts gently patting her head. He just wants to give her the same peace he felt back then. The sudden warmth takes her by surprise, leaving her blushing as she whispers his name. She admits she's embarrassed by the hug, but he just chuckles and says he's in the same boat. Smiling down at her, he mentions how much he admires her for trying so hard despite her small frame. Hearing that, she looks away quietly while she processes the praise. Still, he insists she shouldn't think so lowly of herself, promising her that she's a fine lady that anyone would be proud to know. He tells her to have more confidence, looking her right in the eyes. Overwhelmed, she hides her face as the tears keep coming, thinking about how long she's waited to hear those exact words. Once she finally calms down, he asks if she's feeling better. Looking away, she asks him to just forget about her little outburst, but he shuts that idea down instantly. She can only blink in surprise at how stubborn he's being. He explains she needs to keep all this a secret, since he hasn't told a single soul about the stuff God said to him. Looking a bit confused, She asks why he'd trust her with something so important. Offering a warm smile, he explains that since they're engaged, he wants her to know the real him. He figures they're tied together by destiny, though he keeps the part about being reincarnated to himself for now. Her eyes soften as his sincerity finally starts to sink in. Smiling to herself, she admits this is the first time she's ever been glad to be a princess without a blessing. Sizzle catches her whispering to herself and looks back, asking if she said something. She beams at him, privately thinking that being born without magic is the only reason they ever met. Brushing the thought aside, she tells him it's nothing and suggests they keep moving. Her sudden spark of energy catches him a bit off guard. When she reaches out to take his hand, he gives a quiet nod and lets her lead the way. They walk back toward the castle town, taking in the fresh morning air together. Looking at the tall spires, Lucana wonders how long Sizzle's stepmother is going to lecture him for being out so late. While the couple stays oblivious, a horned man sits on a throne in a shadowed hall, watching their every move. With a sinister smirk, the Watcher whispers that it might finally be time to act. Sizzle wakes up on a cold stone floor with a groggy groan. Blinking his eyes open, he tries to shake off the fog in his head. When he finally looks around, he's greeted by a massive, empty hall with towering windows and long shadows. He sits up slowly, glancing at the polished floor while trying to piece together his surroundings. Looking completely lost, he admits to himself that he has no idea where he is. While he spent time training in the courtyard after that, his mind was clearly elsewhere. Getting a massive lecture from his stepmother the next morning was the price he had to pay. Even now, the memory of her glare makes him shudder. It all started when he managed to sneak out to the city for some fun with Lucana. Finally, he recalls ditching the manor entirely to head deep into the demonic forest. He starts retracing his steps, trying to figure out where things went sideways. Sizzle doesn't even have time to breathe before a pack of wolves jumps him. One bee snaps its jaws, snarling right in his face. Moving as a group, the rest of the pack swarms from the shadows. Landing hard, he hits the ground running to find some space. As they lunge together, he swings a heavy blow to keep them at bay. The strike connects, sending the lead wolf tumbling back with a sharp yelp. Another one lunges in immediately, refusing to give him a second to breathe. More growls echo from the brush. One of them points its nose to the sky and lets out a long, chilling howl. Suddenly, the whole pack closes in, surrounding him on every side. Instead of panicking, he just smiles, admitting he was hoping they'd call for backup. He grips his blade, ready to see what he's really capable of. He unleashes his Thunder Snake technique, sending a jagged bolt of lightning straight toward the pack. The electric current whips through the air, carving a path through the dirt and catching several wolves in the blast. One beast collapses instantly, smoke rising from its fur as the magic takes hold. Watching the aftermath, he pumps his fist and cheers that it was a direct hit. He feels like he's finally getting the hang of his magic. Since he messed up in a cramped space before, he figures these open woods are the perfect spot to really let loose. He even considers how well his spells would pair with a physical weapon later on. Still, as he scans the area, he notices the woods are strangely quiet today. It feels like there are barely any monsters out. His expression turns serious as a weird feeling settles in. Something about this silence is just plain wrong. Thinking back to his earlier training, he remembers the time he almost accidentally torched the entire forest. He stands there with a prickle on the back of his neck, feeling like eyes are on him from somewhere in the trees. Trying to use his lightning search to find a target is useless, as the pulse just fizzles out without catching anything. Since his training session is a bust, he figures he might as well ask the knights for tracking tips later and just head home. Just then, he stops in his tracks as something strange catches his eye. Right there in the brush sits a fancy silver mirror. He stares at it in confusion, certain it wasn't there just a few minutes ago. While it looks incredibly suspicious, he can't help but feel drawn to the strange object. Moving in for a better look, he sees that the surface isn't reflecting the trees instead. It's swirling with a strange, misty light. He's practically vibrating with curiosity, unable to turn away from the strange glow. Telling himself he'll only touch it for a second. He reaches out toward the glass. The moment his fingers brush the surface, the mirror erupts in a blinding flash. He lets out a shout as the white light swallows him whole. He slumps against the floor as the memories finally click, realizing that touching the mirror is what landed him here. Rubbing the back of his head, he stares at the empty corridors while he tries to shake off the grogginess. Since the portal works so smoothly, he wonders if the mirror was less of a trap and more of an invitation to explore. He starts wandering through the fancy hallway, wondering where on earth he ended up. Suddenly, a massive wave of mana hits him from deeper inside. He starts to sweat, feeling a crushing weight that makes his whole body feel heavy. Looking out a window, he sees the clear sky has been replaced by heavy, dark clouds. This definitely isn't the demon forest anymore. It feels like the presence of a legendary dragon, signaling that something massive is lurking nearby. Standing before a pair of giant double doors, he realizes the source of the mana is right on the other side. His hands won't stop trembling as he prepares to move forward. Clutching his necklace to steady himself, he admits it has been a long time since he felt this genuinely terrified. Slowly, the heavy wood begins to creak open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. A muscular man sits on a stone throne at the far end of the hall, surrounded by crackling energy. As the doors open, he remarks that his guest has finally arrived. Sizzle just stands there, feeling tiny against the massive presence filling the room. Leaning forward with a sharp grin, the figure calls him a child of God chosen by the spirit of thunder. He repeats the word spirit under his breath, struggling to take it all in. The man on the throne looks satisfied, noting that the boy is actually pretty sharp. Between the human speech and the massive pressure in the room, it's clear he's standing before an upper-rank spirit. Moving quickly, he drops into a deep bow and stammers out an apology for being rude. The spirit doesn't seem to care, simply turning around and telling him to follow. He trails behind, wondering where on earth they are actually going. Deep down, he knows he stands zero chance in a fight, but running away feels even more impossible. He starts kicking himself for being enough of an idiot to touch that mirror in the first place. When they reach a door, the spirit simply tells him to head inside. He steps through the doorway and finds himself in a room that looks more like a royal palace than a monster's lair. The spirit turns back with a friendly grin, asking what the boy thinks of the place. The kid just blinks, wondering why this legendary being is acting like a proud homeowner. Glancing around, he notices the soft sofas and expensive-looking carpets, admitting the furniture shows off some seriously high-end taste. He gives his head a quick shake, trying to refocus, because admiring the rug shouldn't be his priority right now. A bright smile spreads across his face, showing how thrilled he is to finally play the host. After a second, it clicks for the kid that he's actually been dragged straight into this guy's private bedroom. Snapping his fingers, the spirit realizes this is actually the first time he's ever had a guest over. He tells the boy not to be so stiff and decides to break out some top-tier tea leaves for the occasion. Just then, a fancy teapot and matching cups begin to drift through the air. He watches in silence as tiny, lower-rank spirits float in to start pouring the tea. The spirit gestures for him to take a seat, flashing a very welcoming smile. Looking back at him, the boy feels zero hostility coming from the massive presence. It's almost weird how friendly the host is acting. He eventually sits down, keeping things as polite as possible while he tries to read the room. Suddenly, the spirit leans forward and points out that his guest is being way too formal. He explains that there's no need for restraint, claiming the two of them are basically brothers. Staring back in silence, the kid finds himself struggling to process that family claim. Ignoring the kid's confusion, he figures he should introduce himself while the little spirits finish prepping the tea. A few snacks are set out to go with the drink, but he doesn't let the hospitality distract from his point. Striking a dramatic pose, he reveals he's one of the 7 pillars that weave the world together, the Great Spirit who governs all thunder. He explains that besides thunder, the world is built on 6 other main attributes like fire, earth, and light. Every single element is ruled by a Great Spirit who governs all others within that category. This confirmation sends a chill through Sizzle, realizing his hunch about this guy's status was dead on. He explains that great spirits are essentially gods who have been around since the world began, involved in the birth of nations and the weaving of reality. They represent the absolute peak of existence. Staring at the majestic figure across the table, Sizzle finally starts to grasp the true scale of the person he is sharing tea with. He admits he used to wonder if the thunder attribute was even real since he was the only one with it, but here is the living proof. Despite his godlike status, he leans in and proudly announces that he is actually only 8 years old. The kid just stares back in stunned silence, his brain coming to a dead stop. While the spirit waits excitedly for a reaction, the boy can only manage a confused what. He strikes a massive pose and shouts about being one of the world's 7 elemental pillars. Then, looking incredibly proud, he drops the bombshell that he's only 8 years old. The boy just stares back with a hollow smile, realizing he definitely didn't mishear the guy. It turns out this legendary, godlike being is just a child. He stares at the massive being in silence, wondering if this means they are actually equals. The spirit just tilts his head, completely confused by the casual way the boy is speaking. Panicking a little, the kid quickly explains that he just meant they were born in the same year. The idea clicks instantly, sending the spirit into a state of pure joy. He shouts that they are definitely peers, looking thrilled to finally have someone on his level. While the godlike child celebrates their new bond, the kid just sits at the tea table in disbelief. He stares at the tray of snacks and tea sitting on the table, still trying to process everything. With a friendly grin, the spirit tells him to just have a drink and try to relax for a bit. Sizzle looks at his cup, wondering how he's supposed to chill out in a situation like this, but he takes a hesitant sip anyway. His eyes suddenly go wide as he realizes the tea is actually delicious, which makes the host look pretty proud of his hospitality. He brags about having minor lightning spirits search the whole country for these top-shelf tea leaves. Feeling a bit awkward, Sizzle asks him to stop using formal titles like Lord Child and just use his name. The host agrees immediately, but then he trails off, wondering what he should be called in return. While he searches his memory, a thoughtful look crosses his face. Finally, he admits he isn't sure what his name is, leaving Sizzle stunned that he doesn't even have one. He explains that everyone just calls him Great Spirit, ever since the Thunder God created him and then tossed him aside without a second thought. Hearing this, Sizzle is completely thrown, unable to imagine a god just dumping a child like trash. It's a heavy thought, and he just stares in silence while processing the weight of that history. Suddenly, the spirit's mood flips as he leans in with a wide grin, asking Sizzle to be the one to finally give him a name. The spirit explains that without Sizzle, he wouldn't even exist in this world. Since they are so connected, he sees them as family like brothers or even a father and son and insists there is no one more qualified to name him. Startled by the heavy talk, Sizzle jumps up and waves his hands to try and slow the conversation down. He admits the amount of information coming at him is becoming a bit too much to handle. Wiping away some sweat, he asks what all this talk about being family or master actually means. He still can't quite wrap his mind around the idea that he's the reason this powerful being exists. Seeing his confusion, the spirit asks if the Thunder God ever actually explained how any of this works. Sizzle shakes his head, admitting he hasn't heard a single word since he got that lightning blessing and woke up in this new body. Closing his eyes, the spirit tries to figure out the best way to start this history lesson. He explains that this world was originally built on only 6 core elements, and thunder was never one of them. Sizzle listens intently, realizing he might be more out of place than he thought. By bringing that power here, he essentially became a walking glitch in the system, introducing an element that simply isn't supposed to exist. The spirit says the Thunder God only noticed the screw-up after the reincarnation went through. Apparently, the guy panicked and scrambled to find a way to patch the error. Gesturing with his hand, he explains that forcing a spirit into existence is like bending the laws of reality. It takes a massive amount of energy, making it a tall order even for a divine being. To save time, the god looked for a shortcut by using a powerful creature that already existed in this world as a vessel. Sizzle's eyes go wide as the pieces finally start to fall into place. He just gets a calm, knowing smile in response. Sizzle's eyes go wide as he finally makes the connection to the beast from his past. He realizes it was the Calamity Black Dragon, the same one that tried to kill him. Confirming the theory, the spirit explains that the Thunder God grabbed Sizzle's runaway mana and blasted the dragon with it. That massive creature served as the vessel for his birth. He points to his horns, explaining they are remnants from that dragon's body. Sizzle finally understands why they're both 8 years old, since his arrival and the spirit's birth happened at the exact same time. Letting out a long sigh, he slumps over while the spirit asks what's wrong. He apologizes, admitting the scale of the situation is just way bigger than he expected. Seeing him drained, the spirit snaps his fingers and tells him he needs to eat something to feel better. A massive table loaded with sweets appears out of thin air, and the spirit makes himself comfortable while Sizzle just stares at the feast. He pushes a plate across the table, explaining that these are his personal favorites. It's a gourmet chocolate cake with fresh strawberries, the sort of expensive treat usually reserved for the upper class. Sizzle takes a bite and instantly perks up, the amazing flavor washing away all his stress. The spirit lets out a big laugh, admitting he actually sent his tiny lightning minions out to scout the area for the best food they could find. He asks if the sweets help Sizzle feel any better, mentioning how humans usually eat sugar when they're tired. The boy gives a small, quiet nod, looking a bit more at ease. Watching him closely, the spirit thinks about how incredibly thoughtful he is for his age. Suddenly, he leans in with a big grin and reminds Sizzle that he still hasn't picked out a name yet. With a tired sigh, Sizzle realizes they both got so distracted that they completely forgot the most important part of the day. The spirit crosses his arms and sighs, noticing how Sizzle is still being way too formal. Pointing a finger, he reminds the boy they are equals and tells him to cut out the humble talk. When Sizzle asks if he should at least keep the polite speech as a sign of respect, the spirit's expression goes completely flat. He leans in with a heavy, narrowed stare, making it very clear that he's not asking twice. After a moment of thought, he finally gives in and agrees to treat him like a peer. That seems to satisfy the spirit, who nods along since they really are both just 8 years old anyway. Chizuru starts going through a mental list of every thunder god he can remember from his past life. He weighs options like Zeus and Thor, trying to see if any of those legendary titles click. Focusing on the spirit's dragon form, he finally lands on a name that sounds powerful and right. He whispers the name Vritra. Vritra's eyes go wide as he lets the name sink in, clearly moved by the choice. Seeing that reaction, Chizuru freezes, realizing he actually said that embarrassing name out loud. The spirit admits he loves it, saying it strangely tickles his heart. Chizuru can only think that his companion is having a Chunabu moment. Accepting the title with a nod, Vritra officially becomes the Thunder Dragon Spirit while the boy just panics. He starts worrying that a name is a lifelong commitment, wondering if he just gave his friend something way too flashy. But the spirit just smiles, telling him his mind is already made up. A sudden spark of lightning fills the room. With a sharp grin, he proudly declares that from this moment on, he truly is Vritra, the Thunder Dragon Spirit. He lets out a loud, booming laugh, clearly loving every bit of his new title. After that, they just go right back to eating and enjoying the treats together. He waits for a suggestion, looking surprisingly serious for a moment. When Chizuru hears this, he quickly waves it off, insisting that chocolate was already a great trade. Suddenly, the spirit turns and mentions he needs to give some kind of reward in return. Still, he suddenly starts shouting that just snacks aren't a fair trade for such a cool name. Leaning in close, he asks if there's some kind of trouble he can fix or a big wish he can grant. Chizuru hesitates for a second until something finally comes to mind. Looking him right in the eye, he asks if someone like Vritra could actually beat a great spirit in a fight. Vritra shouts that he has no idea, giving a surprisingly blunt answer. Shrugging, he explains that while he's powerful, he's only been around for 8 years compared to their centuries of experience. When the boy takes this logical answer in stride, Vritra admits he is impressed by such a mature outlook and tells him to be proud. Suddenly, the dragon's face goes serious. After a long silence, he mentions that everything he just said only applies if the opponent is bound by a contract. He explains that the gods put limits on great spirits to keep the world balanced. To use their real power, they have to either wait for a world crisis or find a human to partner with. Looking back at the boy, he adds that the human's own capacity, their vessel, is a huge part of the equation. He admits that if they signed a contract right now, he still wouldn't be at full power. Even so, he's pretty sure they'd be tougher than almost anyone else. Vritra monks on more snacks, adding that they'd have a real winning chance as long as the Great Spirit doesn't have a human partner. Noticing the serious look on the boy's face, the dragon asks if he is actually planning for a fight like that. Shizuru stares into his drink and admits he is worried about a strange shadow haunting a girl he knows. Hearing this, Vritra's expression shifts as he notes that any shadow rivaling a black dragon is almost certainly a great spirit itself. Still, he wonders why a legendary being like that would bother targeting a child in the first place. Vritra explains that spirits don't actually have grand missions or heavy destines. Shrugging, he says they just live however they want, whether that's wandering the world or thus staying by someone they like. Taking another sip of his tea, he notes that since the spirit is scaring off all competition, its interest in the girl is pretty obvious. Still, a decision clearly forms in the boy's mind as he grips his clothes tightly. He looks up at his new companion and admits he has a big favor to ask. Shizuru listens as the dragon spirit suggests the being haunting Rukina might just really like her. It might even be waiting for her magical capacity to grow so it can finally form a contract. Vritra gives a sharp grin and agrees before the request is even fully out. This instant reaction leaves Shizuru blinking in surprise. The dragon spirit explains that they are kindred souls, making any formal explanation unnecessary. Shrugging, Shizuru admits he doesn't quite follow the logic, but the dragon just gives him a firm nod. Vritra then lays it all out, correctly guessing that Shizuru wants a contract to take down a threat and save a girl who matters. The young boy looks back with total resolve, confirming that's exactly what he's after. Seeing that spark in the boy's eyes, Vritra officially agrees to lend him his power. Shizuru beams back, relieved to have his new friend on board. He stands tall and repeats the promise, looking every bit like the legendary spirit he is. But then a devious grin creeps across his face and he starts to chuckle. Without warning, he throws his head back and lets out a massive, booming laugh. The sudden noise makes Shizuru jump, wondering what's so funny all of a sudden. Vritra leans in with a sharp grin, remarking how fitting it is that a great spirit will be his first opponent. Waving his hands in a panic, Shizuru tells him to stop because hearing the name out loud is actually making him cringe. Catching himself, the spirit settles down and admits he might have gone a bit overboard with the drama. He reaches out a clawed hand toward the boy, asking if this is what humans do when they decide to work together. Looking a bit lost, Shizuru stares at the hand, clearly not expecting the offer of a handshake. Reaching out with a blush, he finally takes the offer. As their hands meet, the pact is officially sealed. One firm shake, and the contract is established. But the mood shifts when Vritra lets out a laugh, explaining that once a human signs this black contract, there is no backing out. Shizuru freezes, wondering what kind of deal he just made. Still, he doesn't seem to regret it one bit. Even so, being stuck under house arrest is starting to wear on him. He sits slumped on the sofa, muttering that while he knows he went too far, this punishment feels like a bit much. Maru watches him with a smug smile, calling his name in a sweet, teasing tone. Startled, he wonders if he accidentally spoke those complaints out loud. He remembers when the knights caught him in the forest and hauled him back home. It turns out his grandmother was the one who ordered the house arrest, and she definitely in a forgiving mood. Trying to play it off, He gives a sheepish laugh and claims he's really reflecting on his mistakes this time. That excuse doesn't fly with Maru. She shoots him a terrifying glare, offended that he'd pretend this is anything new. Since the entire Night Order had to drop everything to join the search party, the whole estate is pretty exhausted. He finally starts to look a little guilty, realizing he might have pushed his luck too far. He can see Maru is genuinely upset this time, especially when she tells him that acting cute won't work. Looking at her stern face, he realizes she is actually pretty scary when she's mad. Even Vritra starts to sweat, wondering if the house arrest means he'll have to skip out on dinner. With a tired sigh, she promises she ain't going to go that far. She doesn't stop there, turning to the little dragon and telling him he needs to reflect on his actions too. Watching the two of them, Shizuru is amazed at how naturally a powerful spirit has become a household mascot. This legendary figure is Vritra. While he has a majestic true form, he usually sticks to his tiny mascot body these days. Maru absolutely loves him, doting on the little guy like a regular house pet. To keep things simple, the family tells everyone he's just a thunder dragon cub they found in the forest. Watching him beg for treats, Shizuru asks if a high-ranking spirit is a little embarrassed to be such a glutton. The dragon just strikes a proud pose, claiming he's a growing 8-year-old who needs his meals. Shizuru can't help but feel like that's a pretty convenient excuse for an ancient being. Maru looks him dead in the eye and tells him to listen carefully, reminding him that his mother cares. She points out how much it would hurt the family if anything happened to him. She leans in even closer with a serious face, admitting she would be just as devastated herself. He just freezes there with a bright red face, barely managing to whisper a reply. Suddenly, the door swings open as his mother and Lucana walk in, wondering if they're interrupting a private moment. Lucana freezes in the doorway, her face heating up as she yells his name in a panic. Maru just leans into the misunderstanding, playfully bowing and telling them to go ahead and carry on with their flirting. Snapping at the maid for teaching the girl weird words, Shizuru quickly explains that he was actually just getting a lecture. The realization of how bad the timing was hits him hard, leaving him shouting in frustration. Covering his face, he groans about how embarrassing it is that she saw him being treated like a child. He eventually tries to change the subject by asking if she came over to play with Vritra. Lucana immediately goes for a hug, squeezing the life out of him while gushing about how cute he is. She lifts him up to get a better look, amazed that a baby dragon can talk so well. When she starts rubbing his belly, the legendary spirit can't even protest properly, letting out a weak little squeal. Shizuru leans into the fake backstory, telling her they found him all alone in the woods with no parents. Hearing that, she admits it's lucky he found such a nice home, even if he grumbles that he's the one who chose Shizuru. Vritra adds that Shizuru is a strong guy who will eventually become a contractor worthy of his greatness. Lucana's eyes light up at that, and she enthusiastically agrees that he is already incredible. Seeing she gets it, the little dragon keeps going, claiming Shizuru has the potential to become the strongest in the world. Shizuru just sits there covering his face, begging them both to stop. Ignoring him, she keeps gushing about how cool and wonderful he is. He catches them glancing his way and realizes they're definitely just having fun teasing him. Lucana keeps hugging the little dragon, thinking to herself about how peaceful this whole scene feels. The quiet moment ends when his mother steps in to apologize, reminding them that it's just about time to get moving. Looking a bit startled, she bows her head and asks if they had other plans she was interrupting. Shizuru just flashes a bright grin and invites her to come along for the ride. He leads her into the room where his mother is waiting with a soft expression. Seeing them arrive, she offers a kind welcome and keeps her focus on the young guest. Lucana immediately drops into a deep, formal bow, explaining how happy she is to finally meet the lady of the house. Giggling at the stiff reaction, his mother tells her there's no need to be so nervous and asks if she can reach out to her. The girl manages a small nod, though she remains standing as still as a statue. She covers her face in a sudden rush of shyness, clearly touched by the warm welcome. Reaching out, the mother admires the girl's features and comments on how lovely her hair is. Lucana looks up and mentions her hair is actually a unique mix of her mother's black and her father's red. It's a master class in social skills that leaves Shizuru feeling much more relaxed about the whole visit. Sensing an opening, the woman offers to share some embarrassing stories about her son's baby years. He can only watch in horror as she brings up his old bedwetting habits to his new friend. Elizabeth laughs off the embarrassing stories and tells Lucana she's just happy her son found such a wonderful girl. Hearing this, Lucana shrinks back and admits she feels unworthy because she has no magic power or divine blessings. Her gaze softens as she looks at the downcast girl. Suddenly, she pulls her into a warm, tight hug. Looking down with a gentle smile, she explains that a person's worth isn't measured by magic power. It's about how much happiness they can bring to the people around them. Lucana repeats the words to herself, trying to wrap her head around the idea. Thinking of her home life, she mentions that her father has always treated her with a lot of care. Elizabeth gives an encouraging nod but then asks if there is anyone else in her life like that. The question makes Lucana go quiet as she admits there isn't anyone. Looking genuinely surprised, Elizabeth wonders if there really isn't a single person who is happy just because she's around. Shizuru chimes in right then, acting a bit hurt that she'd forget her own fiancé is standing right there. One of the maids jumps in too, saying she is a huge fan of Lucana and has noticed how much happier he's been lately. Hearing that makes him go a bit quiet as he looks away. He just gives a small nod. Then, he looks straight at Lucana and admits that he really loves seeing her smile. This sets off the maid in the back, who starts squealing about how surprisingly bold he's being. Elizabeth smiles, telling her she just gained 2 more people to count on. After their talk today, she's already grown quite fond of her. She beckons the girl over with a gentle wave, pulling her into a tight hug. She promises that everyone in the house is on her side. She wants her to know she's truly loved here and never has to feel alone again. Lucana leans in, her eyes softening as she finally lets the kindness sink in. Before letting go, Elizabeth whispers for her to have more confidence in herself from now on. Those words really hit home, and she can barely whisper the word mother as she looks back in awe. Snapping back to reality, she starts bowing and apologizing for her lack of manners. Elizabeth just waves it off with a warm smile, insisting that she already considers the girl her own daughter. She thanks them both for the visit and says she'd love to talk again soon as they start making their exit. Their footsteps echo on the floor as they finally head back toward the rest of the house. Shizuru watches her let out a long, relieved sigh and asks if the meeting wore her out. Actually, Lucana admits she only sighed because she finds Elizabeth incredibly elegant and beautiful. Shizuru smiles at the praise, clearly proud of his mother. Walking down the hall, he mentions she was a total magnet for attention back in the day before his father won her heart. Still, he admits she's usually bedridden, making today a rare win. He explains she's suffering from the after effects of a black dragon's attack, which ties back to that story about the god of thunder. When Lucana looks confused, he clarifies that his mom doesn't actually hate the deity, since his lightning was the only thing that saved them from being wiped out. He sighs, instantly regretting bringing it up since dwelling on what-ifs won't change anything. As they walk, he admits that his mother only ended up bedridden because she was busy shielding him from the dragon. He quietly wishes she had just left him behind to save herself, imagining a world where she'd be healthy and happy right now. The weight of that guilt starts to manifest, making his hand tremble as blue sparks crackle around his fingers. He can feel his magic beginning to spiral out of control. The sparks are already biting into his skin, and he realizes his power is running wild. Panicking, he shouts for Lucana to stay back and go find help immediately. He grits his teeth against the stinging pain, cursing the fact that his emotions are getting the better of him yet again. Clutching his shaking arm, he looks down in shame, feeling completely pathetic for losing control like this. Suddenly, Lucana steps right into the sparks and pulls him into a hug. He freezes on the spot, his eyes going wide as he feels her warmth. Because he's terrified of hurting her, he begs her to get back, shouting that he can't stop the lightning. Staring at her in shock, he can barely even manage to say her name. Lucana just keeps her eyes shut and whispers that it's alright, staying still even as the sparks sting her. Sizzle stares at her in shock, seeing a vision of his mother's face in his mind. In this moment, he finally understands why his mother always looked so heartbroken when talking about their family. They stand there in the hallway for a long time as the air finally starts to calm down. Softly, she reminds him of her promise, that they are bound together by the same fate now. She asks him to stand by those words and face the future at her side. Leaning his head on her shoulder, he finally lets out a quiet sob and nods. The hallway falls still as the sparks completely vanish. He takes a breath and admits he's finally feeling okay. Suddenly, he pulls back in a panic to check if she's hurt. He realizes his lightning must have been painful and starts apologizing over and over. Lucana brushes off his worrying, insisting her body is tough enough to handle a few sparks. Instead of more apologies, she asks him to just tell her more about himself. Surprised by the request, he just stares back in silence. Seeing his hesitation, she admits that seeing his vulnerable side earlier made her happy. Whether it's about the god of thunder, the black dragon, or his own powers, she wants the whole story because he is precious to her. Sizzle rubs the back of his neck, clearly unsure of how to start. Still, he looks her in the eye and asks if she will listen to his story anyway. Shrugging a bit, he warns her that nothing he has to say is actually very cool. Without a second thought, she gives him a big yes and stays right by his side as they prepare to finally talk. Magnus jumps in with a big grin, suggesting they go out and make some new memories together. Back in the carriage, Shizuru looks a bit surprised by how fast the mood has shifted. His father explains that since their guests aren't staying much longer, he wants to show them the best sites in the territory to strengthen their family ties. Fired up by the idea, Magnus raises a fist and shouts that they should get going right away. Shizuru agrees it is a great plan, happy to see everyone getting along so well. Soon, the carriage is rattling down the road as their little sightseeing tour begins. Lucana beams, telling Sizzle she's just happy to have one last trip with everyone before she has to leave. Apologizing for Magnus's loud personality, he explains that the man is always like that. She just laughs it off, and he smiles back, feeling excited about the day ahead. Suddenly, a loud cough from across the carriage breaks the mood. It's Sizzle's father, Glenn, watching them from behind his glasses with a skeptical look. Looking them over, he asks if they aren't sitting a bit too close, admitting he's never seen his son look this happy. Lucana just smiles and glances around, looking pretty curious about the trip. Sensing her interest, Sizzle finally asks where the carriage is actually taking them. The horses trot along as they leave the estate further behind. Magnus gives a big laugh and tells them it's a surprise they'll have to wait for. Even though the kids cheer, it turns out this ride isn't just for the scenery. A few days earlier, Glenn pulls Shizuru aside to ask if something inside Lucana turned her into a protectionless princess. Still, his father points out that his own experts ran tests and couldn't find anything unusual. Leaning in with a sharp glare, he asks if the kid is really trying to argue with the Duke's findings. Shizuru gives a firm nod, even though the royal pressure in the room makes him swallow hard. Shizuru doesn't blink, insisting he isn't making things up because he's experienced the truth firsthand. Seeing this spark of courage, Magnus smirks, impressed that the kid has the guts to speak his mind to someone so powerful. Surprisingly, Glenn drops his harsh act and apologizes for being so intense, asking to hear the full details. Shizuru takes a breath and agrees to start from the very beginning. The weight of the secret settles over the room. Glenn's face goes pale as he asks if an entity exists that can actually outmatch a high-rank spirit or even a hero's destructive power. Shizuru simply confirms there is no mistake. Glenn stays quiet for a second, adjusting his glasses as he admits his own information was probably too shallow. He cuts straight to the point. asking if there's actually a way to force that entity out of Lucana's body. Hesitating, Shizuru knows that mentioning Vritra would only make things way more complicated. Before he can find the right words, Glenn stares him down and asks what comes next, leaving the boy completely stunned. Looking into his father's sharp gaze, Shizuru realizes he's been read like an open book. This man is definitely not someone he can hide things from. Glenn continues, explaining that they need magic powerful enough to wipe out a B-rank monster in a single strike. Glenn admits that finding someone with that kind of firepower on short notice is a tall order. Hearing this, Magnus practically jumps out of his seat and offers to take the job himself. But Shizuru immediately shuts that idea down, explaining that while fire magic has great range, it'll likely lose its strength before it can reach the entity hiding deep inside. While the adults process the critique, Magnus is left pouting as Glenn considers the logic. Staring them both down with total confidence, the boy tells them he'll be the one to go. Magnus shouts in disbelief, unable to wrap his head around what he just heard. He stares at the kid, wondering where this sudden surge of bravery is coming from. Reasoning it out, he points out that the engagement is just a political arrangement between families. Since it's such a shallow bond, he doesn't see why a boy would put himself in such extreme danger. When Glenn just stands there sweating and lost for words, Magnus asks the father to step in and talk some sense into his son. Eventually, Magnus starts to smile, figuring the actual reason is a lot simpler than they think. He says there is only one real reason a person would go this far. Magnus leans in with a smirk, saying it's simply because the boy wants to save the girl he likes. He completely loses his cool, his face turning bright red as he yells at his mentor for saying something so embarrassing in front of his father. Sweating under the pressure, he realizes that denying it right now would probably just make everything awkward. Once he gets a grip on his nerves, he looks back at the Duke to keep the conversation serious. After taking a breath, he admits he wants to be the kind of hero who saves everyone. He says he can't stand the idea of someone as kind as Lucana being unhappy. Blushing, he mumbles that it's also his job as her fiancé. Magnus lets out a huge laugh and grabs him, clearly loving the kid's spirit. Grinning, he promises to have his knights support the mission and tells the boy it's time to show everyone what he can really do. He keeps teasing him for being so stubborn about his feelings. Suddenly, the Duke lets out a booming laugh, finally letting the tension escape the room. Shuffling his feet, the boy wonders if his answer sounded a bit too childish. The laughter eventually fades as he looks away, his mind returning to his daughter's situation. As he stares at the floor, he admits he can't give up as a father while others are trying this hard. Turning back to the kid, he calls his name with a much more serious look. The Duke drops to one knee right there, catching everyone off guard with a formal bow. Seeing a high-ranking noble lower himself like this sends the others into a panic. Sizzle quickly tries to get him to stand up, but the Duke remains planted on the floor. Without moving an inch, he keeps his head bowed in total humility. Finally, he looks up just enough to plead with the boy to save Lucana. He answers right away with a firm yes. Standing tall, he accepts the request while the Duke stays on his knees and the others watch in silence. He looks a bit startled when they call his name, as if the weight of the promise is finally sinking in. His thoughts drift back to a quieter time when he was just sharing a meal with Lucana. She apologizes for daydreaming, but he tells her it's fine since the scenery is so nice. They eventually finish off the food, leaving the plates empty. Sitting on the porch together, he tells her that eating outside with her makes everything taste way better. They sit there for a moment enjoying the breeze until he asks what she'd do if she could actually use magic one day. Blinking in surprise, she looks completely caught off guard by a question she's never really considered. Since everyone has always called her unblessed, the idea of having power feels like a distant dream. Looking down at her hands, she eventually admits the first person she'd want to show is her father. She just wants to prove to him that he doesn't have to worry about her being helpless anymore. Hearing this, Sizzle gives her a warm smile and asks if she follow him for a second. He stands up to lead the way. Agreeing immediately, She follows him out into the yard. They wander deep into the tall grass together until she eventually stops and calls out to him. Looking back toward the house, she asks if it's really okay to be this far from her father and the guards. Sizzle keeps his back turned, staring out at the distant mountains. He asks what she thought about their conversation from earlier. She realizes he isn't even looking in her direction, making her wonder if he's actually talking to someone else. Since she stays silent, he seems to give up on an answer. He notes that if she won't talk, he'll thus have to take the next step. Lucana just blinks, looking caught off guard by the sudden question. He looks down with a shadowed expression, deciding he'll just have to drag the truth out by force. Nearby, Magnus asks if it's finally starting while checking that his knights are all in position. Giving a small nod, he tells the boy he's counting on him to handle the rest. Suddenly, Sizzle throws his hand out and calls for Vritra to finally appear. Vritra answers the call with a wild grin, shouting that it's finally time for his first battle as the Supreme Thunder Spirit. Narrowing his eyes, Sizzle focuses every bit of his energy into his outstretched palm. As lightning crackles between his fingers, he tells Lucana to keep her eyes open and watch this closely. She stares at the sparking energy in total shock, barely able to find her words. He apologizes for the sudden scare, offering a small thank you for staying by him while flashing a warm smile. Looking up at him with wide eyes, she decides that if he is this confident, she can put her faith in him. A golden light begins to tear through the air as the ritual truly begins. Striking a final pose, he commands the power to crush any calamity standing in their way. He slams the weapon down with everything he's got, unleashing a massive surge of golden lightning that tears through the air. As the ground shakes under the impact, Lucana just watches in silence, completely stunned by the raw force of the strike. He grips his staff tight, focusing every bit of magic he has into this one moment. Shredding the dark mist, massive bolts of energy arc across the field. The golden light finally starts to push the corruption back. He grits his teeth, barely holding on against the kickback. He realizes the magic he just let loose is way more intense than he expected. Nearby, dark whispers start crawling back, threatening to swallow the girl whole as she gasps for air in the dirt. Vritra watches the whole scene from above, looking completely unbothered by the chaos. Straining under the pressure, Sizzle shouts for the dragon to help him finish the job. The dark presence inside her lets out a final, furious scream as it's ripped away. Vritra shifts back to his humanoid form and checks if his master is holding up. Catching his breath, Sizzle nods and thanks the dragon for the help. He looks at the girl, noticing for the first time just how young she really is. That last, pained scream still rings in his ears. Suddenly, a heavy sliding sound echoes through the quiet clearing. Out of the shadows steps a girl who looks like Lucana, but her ears are pointed and her dress has turned pitch black. Sizzle stands there frozen, barely able to find his words as he stares at the transformation. Her eyes are cold and sharp, showing no trace of the gentle princess from before. It seems whatever was lurking inside Lucana hasn't been destroyed. It has finally taken over. Vritra watches the girl carefully, noting that her presence feels just like the Lucana they knew. As Shizuru tries to process the change, he realizes the pressure she's putting off might actually be higher than before. He can only stare in silence as she glares back with an intense, predatory look. Vritra cuts through the silence, warning Shizuru not to be fooled by her new appearance. Nodding slowly, Shizuru admits he already knows. He can feel the heavy shift in the air, and it's not looking good. When Lucana finally speaks, her voice is icy as she asks why they're even trying to stop her. Still, she rises with a murderous gaze, promising to destroy anyone who gets in her way. She bluntly says everyone should just die, and the dark aura around her gets even heavier. Shizuru grinds his teeth, struggling against the pressure as he shouts for Vritra to move. Glaring back, Vritra shouts his agreement and gives her a fierce look. Realizing they can't wait any longer, the two of them prepare to settle this right now. He focuses every bit of his remaining magic, determined to push through her defense and end the corruption. But before the fight can continue, a heavy rumbling echoes as the sky suddenly turns into a deep shadow. Feeling the shift, Glenn stops cold and gestures for Magnus to look at the giant structure sealing them in. He stares through his glasses, trailing off in disbelief as he realizes they've been caught in a spell far beyond their level. This massive black cube is actually a magic prison, a high-level spell that completely swallows the sky. Magnus looks up at the sheer scale of it, wondering who could possibly pull off something this big. Adjusting his glasses, he admits there's really only one person he knows with this kind of power. As he calls out to his friend, Glenn just stares ahead with a grim expression. He's staring at the dark figure, recognizing her as the Great Spirit of Darkness, Rouge. The sight leaves him stunned because he's certain his old team of heroes finished her off years ago. Shouting for the kids to stop, he figures this might be too much for even Chizuru to handle. Then he charges across the battlefield, desperate to reach them before things spiral out of control. Magnus screams for him, watching in terror as the knight charges right into the enemy's path. Suddenly, a blur of motion tears across the battlefield faster than the eye can follow. He hits the dirt, cursing his own weakness as he struggles to get back up. A tall, masked figure looms over him and calmly asks if he's doing okay. Wiping sweat from his forehead, he lets out a shaky breath and admits he's glad someone stepped in. Looking up, he realizes his savior is actually Marl. He calls out her name in shock, not expecting the family maid to be the one holding a blade. Keeping her eyes on the enemy, she simply says she's glad he isn't hurt. She warns them that another attack is coming, telling everyone to stay sharp. Watching her take a stance, it's clear she isn't just a regular servant, but a lethal warrior. Magnus stares in total shock as he finally makes the connection that this girl is Shizuru's personal maid. Leaping back into the air, she moves with a speed that doesn't match her maid uniform at all. Even though he suspected the boy had elite protection, he never guessed it would be someone like her. Magnus explains that Marl is actually the one who taught Chizuru how to handle weapons. He admits her strength is on a whole different level, leaving Glenn looking pretty stunned. A vein pops on the warrior's head as he grumbles about how gutsy the maid was to jump in and rescue him. Suddenly, the mood shifts when Magnus notices something that makes his face go pale. Marl stays silent, keeping her guard up as the atmosphere turns heavy. Screaming at the top of his lungs, Magnus tells everyone to evacuate the area immediately. The crowd starts to scatter as a strange rumbling sound begins to fill the air. A man charges forward with a wild look in his eyes, shouting for Glenn at the top of his lungs. Watching from the sidelines, Magnus admits he never expected to witness a hero's annihilation magic in person. Marl stands her ground nearby, whispering a quiet prayer for Chizuru to stay safe while the area erupts. Staring ahead, the young boy keeps his focus and waits for the dust to settle. He pants heavily, trying to catch his breath while wondering if the strike actually landed. The smoke clears to show the impact zone, but the result isn't what he expected. Instead of being defeated, the girl stares back with a cold look, asking who they even are. Just then, the demon lord steps up beside him and looks him over. He admits he's never seen a human kid like Chizuru who fights like a real thunder dragon. Rouge watches the exchange with a stunned expression. Dismissing the whole situation, the girl turns to leave, figuring the details don't really matter. She flashes a wide, cheerful smile and mentions that he's going to die soon anyway. Without another word, a massive swarm of black daggers begins raining down from above. Raising her arm to guide the attack, she unleashes the full weight of the spell while the elf girl tries to stay clear of the impact. Chizuru activates Lightning Boost to keep from being pinned down by the falling daggers. Weaving through the air, he manages to dodge the projectiles with incredible speed. He keeps his momentum going, moving through the storm of blades like a blur. Seeing him escape yet again, the assassin clicks her tongue and admits he is starting to get on her nerves. Instead of running, Chizuru stands his ground and throws up a thunder barrier. The electric dome holds firm as the daggers slam into the sparks. Seeing the defense, the assassin just gives a sly grin. She tells him he's doing a good job before promising to crank up the pressure. Just like that, the rain of blades doubles in intensity. He grits his teeth, realizing the volume of the attack is finally becoming too much to handle. Reaching out to stabilize the shield, he watches as the energy ripples start to fracture. The assassin lets out a manic laugh, claiming she finally found the weak spot in his technique. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoes through his defense. As she shouts for him to just die, the daggers slam into his position with everything she has left. Despite the danger, he just flashes a confident smirk. He catches the force of her blood dagger directly, his shield throwing off sparks as it holds the line. Seeing the impact, the assassin looks stunned and yells about how impossible it is for her attack to be stopped like this. The opening is finally there, and he shouts that the time is now. He launches forward with an explosive burst of speed, closing the gap before she can even process it. She tenses up as he suddenly appears right in front of her. Their blades meet in a shower of sparks, the impact sending a sharp ring through the air. Instead of backing off, Chizuru maintains a relentless pace, trading strike for strike in a blur of motion. He knows he can't let up for even a heartbeat. With a cold, steady gaze, he promises himself that he won't give her a single opening to recover. Their weapons lock in a heavy grind, sparks flying everywhere as his thunder magic surges through the steel. She clicks her tongue in frustration, admitting the lightning is starting to get on her nerves. Chizuru stays right in her face, telling her that while she's put up a good fight, his sword is much easier to handle at this range. Leaning in, he reminds her that closing the gap like this was the plan all along. She screams that this is the end, her face twisted in a mix of rage and triumph as she thinks she finally has him cornered. With a deafening clang, their powers collide in a massive shockwave. Looking completely unbothered, Chizuru just smirks and tells her that would only be true if he were actually holding a spear. He catches her completely off guard by suddenly shifting his stance. Refusing to be intimidated, she grits her teeth and prepares to block whatever he is about to throw. With a final shout, he lets the attack fly, causing a massive, sparking impact. While he builds up power, he explains that he's mixing a secret throwing technique from Marl with his own thunder magic. The blast is just a distraction, though, swinging a massive battle axe out of nowhere, he catches the assassin completely off guard. He lets out a roar, putting every ounce of weight into the strike. The massive blade slams down with enough force to shatter the ground, but she dances back just in time to avoid the impact. Clicking his tongue, he realizes even this heavy hitter wasn't enough to finish things. She just stares at him in pure annoyance, wondering why he keeps swapping through different weapons like it's nothing. She glances away, realizing he must have some kind of deal with the Demon Lord since they're fighting on equal ground. Nearby, the Demon Lord just watches the struggle, thinking it's rare for a human kid to be this skilled. Chizuru stays focused, figuring he finally has a real shot at winning this. The demon remains silent, letting the tension hang in the air between them. Staring at the boy, he admits to himself that things are only going to get harder from here. Chizuru lets out a shout and slams his weapon down with everything he's got. Instead of taking the hit, Rouge just steps to the side, asking him if he's really trying that move again. She looks completely bored by the whole thing, since she's seen this so many times already. She tells him she ain't about to fall for the same trick twice. Chizuru just gives her a look, figuring he might as well prove her wrong. Instead of another heavy swing, he calls out a new technique called Thunder Snake. Arcs of lightning whip toward her, catching her off guard for a split second. One of the electric snakes snaps right against her arm. As the smoke clears, she admits she is surprised he still has new tricks up his sleeve, though she claims it won't matter once she gets the hang of it. Still, the effort is clearly taking a toll, and he struggles to catch his breath as the pressure mounts. Watching from within, the Horned Spirit wonders if he has finally realized the truth about their opponent. She is just naturally on another level, her power as a great spirit dwarfing anything they can throw at her. Even with their powers combined, they are barely holding their own. It is a losing battle, and the odds are stacked heavily against them. As he stares her down, he starts to understand just how terrifying a great spirit's full strength really is. Even with the massive gap in power, he addresses her directly, casually using her name as the Great Spirit of Darkness. She just stares him down in silence, her expression going cold at the lack of respect. Looking genuinely annoyed, she snaps that he should use a respectful title when speaking to her, calling him a brat for his attitude. He just nods and holds up his hands, admitting that she's right. Dropping to his knees, he begins to lower himself right in front of her. Without a word, he presses his forehead all the way to the dirt in a formal bow of surrender. Rouge looks down at him with a smug grin, wondering if he is finally regretting his attitude and suggesting she might forgive him if he starts crying and begging. But that smugness vanishes the second her eyes go wide and her mouth hangs open. Sparks erupt from the floor as a massive surge of electricity rips through her, catching her completely off guard. Her legs buckle and she gasps for air, unable to stop her body from shaking as the current takes hold. Shizuru lets out a long sigh of relief, feeling lucky the ground was solid enough to carry his magic. Keeping his palms pressed against the dirt, he explains that lightning doesn't just strike from above. He recalls how in his past life, people hiding under trees would still get hit because of how electricity spreads through the earth. This side flash effect was the secret to bypassing her high-level defenses. He mentions that while these principles are basic in Japan, this world hasn't really researched lightning yet. Because of that, even a great spirit like Rouge is completely blindsided by the logic behind his move. Twitching as sparks jump across her skin, she struggles to stay upright, frustrated that she fell for another strange trick. Still, she closes her eyes for a second, clearly trying to refocus her energy. Electricity crackles around her as she pulls what's left of her magic together. Watching her closely, he realizes his current trap won't hold much longer. Since they're both completely drained, he figures now is the only time to strike. He turns to Vritra and asks the spirit to send over every drop of power it has left. Looking concerned, Vritra warns him that his physical body can't take much more of this. Shizuru admits he knows the danger, but he tells the spirit there isn't any other choice if they want to win. Giving him a serious look, Vritra finally agrees and warns him not to go overboard. As the energy begins to flow, he offers a quick word of thanks. He stares ahead with a steady gaze, ready to put everything into one final strike. He lets the lightning surge through his entire body, activating a full power boost for his final strike. Nearby, Rouge finally catches her breath and admits she can't believe he actually forced her to her knees. Her expression turns cold as her eyes begin to glow. She warns him that she won't forgive anyone who dares to defy a great spirit. She manifests a ball of pure darkness in her hand as she finishes her warning. With a cold expression, she shows she's done playing games. Raising her arm high, she lets the energy swell. The orb expands into a massive sun of shadow that dwarfs everything around it. Telling him to fall into eternal darkness, she gets ready to end the fight right here. She unleashes her dark star judgment, letting a massive void of crackling energy loom over the entire field. Facing down that wall of shadows, Shizuru doesn't back away or even blink. Instead, he keeps his eyes locked on the target, waiting for the perfect moment to counter. Then he calls out for a sword of lightning to destroy the evil in front of him, pouring his remaining strength into one final, desperate strike. Shizuru swings the massive blade, calling out the name of the lightning god, Takemikazuchi. As the sword connects with the sphere of darkness, the entire area erupts in a blinding explosion of energy. Caught in the blast, Rouge can only let out a pained cry as the sheer force begins to tear through her defense. He plants his foot firmly, refusing to give an inch even after that massive explosion. Staring her down, he reminds himself that he gave his word to keep Lucana safe. Even with the smoke clearing, Rouge is visibly frustrated that he is still on his feet. She just stares at him in silence, clearly shaken by the fire in his eyes. Suddenly, she lets out a pained gasp as the force of the strike finally breaks through. Wincing as she clutches herself, her dark energy begins to flicker and fade. She stares at her hands in confusion, unable to figure out why her magic is failing. Looking up, he realizes a familiar presence is taking over. Vritra just gives a confident smirk, telling him to keep his eyes open. Sizzle catches his breath, noticing that the overwhelming pressure from her attack is gone. She wobbles on her feet, barely keeping it together as the damage from Sizzle's attacks finally starts to sink in. Staring at her trembling hands, she can't believe she's actually being pushed this far. Even when she tries to force her magic into healing her wounds, the energy just won't follow her lead. Vritra sees the opening and shouts for Sizzle to get ready, funneling every last bit of his power straight to the boy. He is already in the air, tearing forward before she can even process the sudden shift in speed. Watching with a steady grin, Vritra sees his faith in the kid start to pay off. She just stares in stunned silence, realizing her defenses won't be enough this time. Roaring at the top of his lungs, he pours every bit of that borrowed power into a massive, final charge. He is putting everything on the line to end this fight right now. Rouge freezes as the blade closes in, her eyes wide with shock. She barely manages a gasp, realizing she is completely out of time. Just like that, the lightning strike tears through the air with a massive roar. Sizzle pours every last drop of his power into this final, decisive hit. Vritra watches the dust settle, wondering if the kid managed to finish it. Once the flash fades, a thick cloud of smoke is all that's left in the crater. Slowly, Rouge emerges from the haze, swaying back and forth while she stares him down. Gritting her teeth, she admits she can't believe a couple of kids are overwhelming her. He stares at her through heavy breaths, realizing he's in real trouble now that she's still upright. She wobbles on her feet, barely holding herself together while she mutters that things aren't finished. Refusing to quit, Sizzle forces his heavy legs to move and launches himself into one more desperate charge. Rouge watches his every move, noticing his swings are getting slower as he finally hits his physical limit. Even with her own energy fading, she screams about how stubborn he is and gathers her remaining magic to push him back. Rouge demands to know what his deal is, yelling that he's constantly getting in the way. Sizzle doesn't back down, asking if she means Lucina and telling her she's the one causing all the trouble. Stunned by his nerve, her eyes widen in total disbelief. She insists she is only watching over the girl until she's fully grown. As far as she's concerned, he's just a clueless brat who doesn't understand the real situation. She lets out a tired sigh, deciding it's finally time to fill him in. According to her, Lucina, in some helpless girl without protection, it's the exact opposite, because she carries the spirit's blessing. The name clearly catches him off guard, leaving him standing there in stunned silence. As the news sinks in, he realizes he's actually read about this legendary power in an old book once. The pages describe how spirits like many people, but a rare few are chosen for an even deeper kind of favor. In this world, they're the ones who receive what's known as the spirit's blessing. Staring at her in silence, Sizzle tries to process the fact that the girl he's protecting is facing such a dark reality. Unfortunately, the spirit's power is just too much for a human body to handle. Because of the constant strain, children with this gift rarely get the chance to grow up. As one of those children, Lucina appears calm, as if she's just drifting through a quiet dream. Knowing the girl won't live a full life, she has spent every moment making sure Lucina stays safe. Sizzle just stands there sweating as the gravity of it all sinks in. She asks if he finally gets it now, explaining that this is the only reason she's even here. Her expression softens for a second as she thinks back to her dearest friend. In the end, everything she's done is just to keep a promise she made to Maria. She thinks back to how it all began. A quiet forest path stretches out, filled with the sound of birds and soft sunlight. Amidst the massive trees, she sits by herself, looking incredibly small. Blood drips from her chin as she tries to catch her breath, realizing just how badly she messed up. She joined the Demon Lord just because it seemed like fun, never expecting the great spirit of light and those heroes to get this strong. Her expression sharpens, eyes full of spite as she swears to hunt the hero down and take everything from him. She wants to see his whole world crumble, his friends, his family, everything. Then, looking up at the quiet forest canopy, she just lets out a weary sigh, realizing none of that hate matters now. She watches her hand go limp, wondering if this is finally the end. It's a lonely thought, since the gods will just replace any great spirit that disappears with someone new. Resting against a tree, she tries to act tough, telling herself she's had plenty of fun and has no regrets. Her vision stays fixed on the forest as the light around her slowly starts to dim. But then she whispers a single word, calling herself a liar and admitting she is actually ready to die. Slumped against a tree, she admits to herself that she never really enjoyed her life as a great spirit. Her legs finally give way, and she collapses face down in the dirt. Crying out in total despair, she screams that she hates the idea of dying in a place like this, all alone. As the world starts fading to black, she figures this must finally be the end. Just then, a rustle in the grass cuts through her thoughts and a young girl steps into the clearing. Peering down with a worried expression, the stranger asks if she's alright. Rouge's eyes go wide as she tries to process the sight, barely able to choke out a question about who just found her. The girl introduces herself as Maria Rufus, the daughter of a marquis who carries a special blessing of darkness. Beaming with curiosity, she asks to hear all about the world outside her family's land. This encounter marks the moment their two lives finally cross. When Maria comes running back the next day, she shouts her new friend's name with a huge smile. Rouge just watches her approach, wondering why this human kid is so persistent. As it turns out, she didn't collapse in a wild forest at all, but rather on the massive private grounds of the Rufus estate. Since then, the two have been meeting up in secret every single day. Hanging out with Maria and her blessing of darkness actually helps Rouge heal. As the days pass, her strength starts to return, yet her gaze still drifts back toward her only companion. Looking a bit grumpy, she asks why Maria is always in such a hurry to come see her. Maria just stares back, looking a bit surprised by the question. Since she can finally move freely again, she tells herself she doesn't need to stay in this place another minute. She admits she was worried Rouge would just leave her behind. Rouge shrugs it off, saying she'd stick around for a while since she has nothing better to do. Softening her expression, she promises she would never do something like that. Maria's face lights up at the news, making Rouge realize just how far they've come. Looking at her now, she remembers that Maria was born with a weak, sickly body. After she starts coughing from the excitement, Rouge jokingly calls her a fool for overdoing it. It turns out that fragile health was actually tied to her spiritual blessing. That illness was the only reason she was even out in the forest to find Rouge in the first place. Two lonely people had finally found someone who truly needed them. Maria spends most of her days sitting by the window in silence. Since her family doesn't show her much affection, she mostly drifts through the quiet rooms of the estate alone. Feeling her heart fill with warmth, Rouge realizes this girl doesn't want her power, she wants her company. It is a massive change for the former spirit, and she figures it is time to start making her friend's life a little better. Thinking about how humans have such short lives anyway, staying by her side feels like a small price to pay. Later on, she stops the girl during one of their walks to share some news. She tells her she doesn't have to bother coming out to this forest anymore, which catches her by surprise. Rouge clarifies that she's found a way to come to Maria instead, suddenly shrinking down into a tiny spirit form. Staring in awe, Maria can't believe how cute and small her friend has become. Since she's so small now, Rouge figures she can sneak into the mansion and stay by her side every single day. To Maria, it feels like a dream come true, and she promises they'll never have to be apart again. Years slip by in peace after that, and as the great war between humans and demons finally ends, the two grow up side by side. One afternoon, a much more elegant Maria looks out at her estate and gently tells Rouge that she's decided to get married. The news hangs in the air, signaling a massive shift in their quiet life together. Over the years, she has become more than just a companion, she is family now. Being so protective, Rouge half jokes about making the guy disappear if he doesn't measure up. Maria just giggles, her face glowing as she gushes about Lord Magnus. Even so, a concern lingers, and the spirit asks if being a side wife is truly enough for her. Beaming, She insists he has a perfect reputation and this is a lucky match. To her, this marriage is a way to finally pay back her parents for years of worrying. Rouge ain't really interested in the politics of the marriage, even joking that she'd just wipe out the territory if anyone mistreats her friend. Smiling warmly, Maria thanks her for being so protective. As far as she's concerned, it doesn't matter where they go because she is going to follow Maria wherever she lives. A few years pass by at the Lorelei estate until things take a massive turn. When Maria reveals she is finally pregnant, Rouge stares at her in complete shock. She snaps and tells her friend to stop joking, insisting there's no way her weak body can handle a pregnancy. But Maria just looks her in the eye and admits she already knows the risks. Despite the danger, she gives a small smile, looking completely at peace with her choice. Frustrated by the stubbornness, Rouge turns away and yells that she's done trying to talk sense into her. Maria looks at her with a sad, steady gaze and says she already knows. Softly, she admits that her time is short either way. Hearing this, Rouge whips back around and grabs her friend's dress, begging her not to rush toward the end. She cries out that they still have so much to do together, her hands trembling as she clings to the fabric. Maria stares into the distance, admitting she actually has one lingering regret. Turning back with a soft smile, she explains that her only real worrying is leaving her friend to face everything alone. Hearing that, Rouge snaps back and tries to lie about how little she misses her. Knowing better, Maria reaches out to gently cover her hand and tells her she doesn't have to act so strong. Maria pulls her into a close embrace, resting their foreheads together while admitting she knows her friend's heart better than anyone. Through the sobbing, Rouge begs her to choose the path that lets her stay alive for as long as possible. She just looks down at her stomach with a gentle smile, saying everything will be okay because she has this child now. Then, reaching up to wipe away a stray tear, she jokingly warns her that all this crying is ruining her pretty face. She explains that her heart and will live on through this baby, so Rouge will never truly lose her. If this child has kids one day, the cycle just keeps going. She asks if that isn't a wonderful thing, insisting that her friend won't ever be lonely. Rouge stays silent, staring down with a hollow look in her eyes. In her mind, she doesn't want a legacy, she just wants her friend to stay alive. Maria reaches out and takes her hands, trying to get her attention. She then asks Rouge to be the one who picks out a name for the baby. Rouge pauses for a second, feeling the weight of such an important task. When Maria asks with a soft smile if the child is a boy or a girl, she learns she is having a daughter. After a moment of silence, the name Lucana finally leaves her lips. She explains the name belongs to a goddess of birth, a figure who acts like a moon shining through the deep darkness. Listening quietly, Maria seems to take in the beautiful meaning behind the choice. Rouge admits with a small blush that she actually thought of this name the very first day they met. Maria is absolutely beaming, clearly touched that her best friend has been carrying this name in her heart for years. To her, Maria was the gentle light that pulled her out of deep despair when she felt like she was fading away. Shrugging it off, she promises to protect the child, joking that she doesn't have anything better to do with her time anyway. Maria is so happy she pulls her into a sudden hug and tells her she loves her, though she is quickly reminded to stay still so she doesn't hurt herself. Despite all the warnings, Maria's body finally gives out. She lies still in a bed of flowers now, her hands folded peacefully over her chest. Staring down at her friend, Rouge looks completely hollow. She doesn't even have tears left, just a heavy, silent stare as she processes the loss. She stands alone by the coffin and quietly scolds her friend, whispering that she knew Maria wouldn't be able to handle the strain. It's a bitter realization she really couldn't make it after all. Rouge places flowers over her friend's body, whispering that everything is going to be okay. She repeats her promise to keep the baby safe, making sure Maria's final wish is honored. Looking at the little one, she's glad to see the girl takes after her mother so much. She figures the kid will grow up to be a real beauty one day. But as she watches the crib, a new complication starts to show itself. Tiny spirits are dancing and swirling around the infant, drawn in by the incredible spiritual power she's already putting out. Rouge is stunned, knowing she's never heard of a spirit blessing actually being passed down to a child. She stares in disbelief at the impossible sight unfolding right in front of her. Sitting by the crib, she watches the spirits crowd around the newborn as if they've found a new queen. Just silent flickers of light, drifting through the air. Still, she figures it'll be fine, because this time she's going to be there for Lucina from the very start. She watches the baby sleep, letting out a soft breath as she reaches out to touch those tiny hands. Looking out at the moonlight, Rouge promises to shield her from spirits and greedy humans alike. As she leans in close, she tells the little one to rest easy while she handles any trouble that comes their way. One last whisper of the name Lucina, and the promise to her best friend is finally sealed. Rouge stands there for a moment thinking back on Maria, remembering her as a truly kind soul who stayed happy until her very last breath. Looking down with a faint smile, she keeps talking about how wonderful her friend really was. But the mood shifts the second Chizuru looks up with a piercing gaze, catching her completely off guard. He lunges forward instantly, sparks of electricity crackling as he cuts right through the space between them. Startled by the sudden attack, she snaps at him and calls him a brat for getting in her way. Instead of backing off, he stays focused. With lightning flickering in his eyes, he asks why she can't just give all that love to Lucina instead of being stuck on Maria. She just looks back at him confused, asking what he's even talking about. Still, Chizuru doesn't back down, shouting that Lucina is only suffering because she's been forced to lock her heart away. Shaking with anger, he points out how she was engaged to a total stranger, thus to be used for her status and power. Finally, he screams that no 7-year-old should ever have to deal with this kind of pressure. The woman snaps back, telling him to shut up. She insists that since the girl is destined to be a top-tier mage, she is the only one who can protect her for now. Leaning in, Chizuru challenges her to do it the right way and protect the girl openly if she's so confident. Shaking with anger, she argues that stepping into the light would just turn a defenseless child into a target for everyone with bad intentions. Still, he screams back, asking if she even understands how much she's failing the girl. She brushes him off, insisting she understands the girl better than anyone else. Keeping her face cold and distant, she starts to turn away. He repeats those words back to her, clutching his chest while he laughs at the idea. When she doesn't respond, he tells her flat out that she isn't actually looking at Lucina. He tenses up, his resolve hardening for one final call-out. The truth is, he says, the only person she actually sees is Maria. He mentions that because spirits like him too, he can tell what's really going on in her head. She's clinging to her promise with Maria like a lifeline, but that obsession is only feeding her own darkness. Leaning in, he asks if she even understands the depth of her own feelings for the woman she lost. She just looks back with a blank, hollow expression. Finally, he admits he's felt a strange presence ever since he got trapped here, and at first, he was sure it was Rouge. But as soon as she brought up Maria, he knew exactly what was happening. A soft voice starts echoing in his mind, pleading with him to save the girl from the darkness. He listens to the quiet, desperate whispers, his gaze sharpening as the truth hits him. Standing his ground, he tells her he's heard the message loud and clear. The entity thus stares at him in total shock, barely able to breathe out Maria's name. He tells her to leave everything to him, promising to sweep away the darkness once and for all. Watching in disbelief, the entity can't wrap her head around why Maria's spirit would choose a stranger over her. He ignores the confusion and calls out to Vritra, asking the spirit for one last favor. The spirit looks back with a serious expression, warning that the boy's body is already well past its breaking point and should have collapsed by now. He offers to go all out and tear open a path, promising to create the perfect opening for a final strike. When he doesn't get a response, he asks if Chizuru is even listening, shouting to snap the kid out of it. The spirit clearly starts to worry. Still, the boy just stares off and mutters that it's all right. He turns back with a gentle, reassuring smile, insisting that everything is going to be fine. He adds that the moon goddess is on his side now, standing tall while a bright light starts to pour out of his body. Watching this, the Great Spirit is baffled and tries to dismiss his words as nonsense. Finding the whole gamble pretty interesting, he starts to wonder what would happen if he added his own full strength to the mix. With a wild grin, he decides to play along and tells Chizuru to take every bit of his Thunder Dragon strength. His expression shifts to shock when he realizes the boy's mana is just returning. It's being joined by a second, massive power source. Lucana snaps at him, yelling about how annoying it is that he acts like he knows everything. Her eyes go wide with rage while she screams for him to just stay out of her way. Instead of arguing, he stays perfectly calm and raises his hand to set up one last all-or-nothing strike. He lunges forward, putting everything he has left into one massive, jagged bolt of lightning. Calling out the name of his ultimate move, Kongo Waku, he lets the energy rip through the air with enough force to shake the ground. With his eyes fixed on the target, he lets out a final shout, putting every bit of strength he has into the blow to finish this. The resulting blast tears through the air with enough force to shatter everything in its path. Stunned, Lucana can't even move as the energy completely overwhelms her defenses. She grits her teeth, realizing this power is nothing like what he showed earlier. It's on a completely different level, and the pressure is finally starting to weigh her down. She stares in shock, refusing to accept that she's losing. Pushing the advantage, he explains he isn't fighting alone since both Vritra and Maria are backing him up. As she screams out in denial, a soft, glowing hand reaches through the light. It stretches toward her, appearing just as she starts to break. Maria pulls her into a gentle hug, holding her close as the chaos finally settles. Watching her, Lucana lets the tears fall as she whispers her name. Just as she lets go of her anger, the dark crystal nearby begins to crack. With a deafening sound, the dark structure completely shatters into a million pieces. Chizuru stands back and watches the fragments fall, realizing the source of the curse is finally gone. Maria begins to dissolve into a soft glow, her time in this world coming to an end. Looking up with teary eyes, Lucana asks if her mother saw her hard work. She begs for just a few more seconds, but the spirit continues to vanish into the light. While walking into the glow, Maria says she'll be waiting on the other side. Before she goes, she tells Lucana that she still needs to stay behind and protect the boy. Lucana stands there in total shock, barely able to process the words. She reaches out into the emptiness, begging for just a little more time, but Maria's hand slips away as she gives one final, gentle refusal. She is left alone, grasping at thin air. Chizuru calls her name, pulling her back to the present. He stands there with a calm smile, looking completely at peace despite the chaos. Tears well up in her eyes as he tells her he heard every single word of her goodbye. Softly, he explains he felt her heart and the bond she shared with her mother, acknowledging the heavy burden she's been carrying. Lucana looks away, processing his words. Convinced he must hate her after everything, she tells him to just finish it and end her life. But instead of a final blow, Rouge lunges forward and pulls her into a warm hug while tearfully thanking her. The girl freezes on the spot, her eyes wide as she tries to make sense of the sudden kindness. She realizes she was never truly alone after all. Tears stream down her face as she apologizes for not noticing sooner. Overwhelmed by the display of affection, Lucana breaks down and wonders why these two are so close. Chizuru watches them from the side, figuring he worked hard enough to earn a hug of his own. Suddenly, the quiet is shattered when a loud voice calls out his name and a man comes charging onto the scene. It's Magnus, who pulls his son into a crushing hug while laughing and praising him for a job well done. Chizuru can barely breathe and begs to be let go, but his father just keeps on chuckling. Once he finally settles down, he promises to handle the rest of the situation here. He tells the boy it's time to leave the cleanup to the adults. Hearing that, the kid lets out a long sigh of relief. He's just glad everything is finally over. But as the adrenaline fades, his legs give out and he starts to topple over. Magnus panics immediately, calling out as he sees his son collapsing. Luckily, Homura sweeps in and catches him just before he hits the dirt. She's pretty casual about it, hoisting him up with a small smile, explaining that he's just drained from using too much mana. She manages to get Magnus to finally relax. When she asks if he'll be alright after such a scene, the father doesn't seem worried. Magnus just shrugs it off, figuring things will work out one way or another. This carefree attitude gets him an immediate scolding, as Homura reminds him they still have a huge mess to clean up. Magnus turns serious for a moment, promising to protect both the Von Blaze name and his title, the Crimson Knight. Blinking in surprise, Homura watches him drop the goofy act for once. As Rukuna's father offers his deepest thanks, he promises to support their family in any way he can. Magnus just chuckles, while the noble remarks on how interesting things have become. A great spirit of darkness hiding inside Chizuru, that reveal finally explains why the kid's power was so overwhelming. Meanwhile, Rouge stays silent, looking a bit overwhelmed by the weight of it all. He is already out cold, snoring softly while the adults wrap things up. Homura cradles him with a gentle smile, finally welcoming her master home after the long ordeal. Behind them, Magnus watches with a quiet sense of pride. It's a rare moment of peace for the young mage, marking the end of a very long day. Morning light hits the grand estate, and birds chirp like it's just any other day. He slowly opens his eyes as the sun pours through the tall windows. Sitting up in bed, he looks around the quiet room with a blank expression. While he tries to shake off the grogginess, the memories of the battle start flooding back. He stares at his palms, finally letting it sink in that they really pulled it off. As he looks up, he notices a figure slumped over the edge of his bed. It's Lucina, fast asleep and looking like she hasn't moved an inch. Looking down at her with a gentle smile, he wonders if she's been there the entire time he was out. She doesn't even stir, clearly worn out from the long wait. The peace breaks instantly when a sharp chop hits the back of his head, making him yelp in surprise. Chizuru spins around to find Rouge glaring down at him. She demands to know exactly what he was doing to the sleeping girl. Before he can even process the hit, she flat out calls him a pervert. He starts sweating, wondering when she even showed up. He tries to defend himself by reminding her he's only 8 years old. Narrowing her eyes, she lets out a long, unimpressed hum. She leans in closer to ask him if he's really sure about that. He freezes on the spot, looking like he's been caught in a lie. Luckily, Rouge decides to let the age mystery slide for now. Feeling relieved, Chizuru asks what the plan is moving forward. Staring off, she explains that she already had a long talk with his dad and the other parents while he was out. During that meeting, Magnus greeted her like an old friend, noticing she hasn't changed a bit. Rouge just scoffs and tells him he's the one who looks old now. Magnus takes a seat anyway, making himself comfortable to talk business. They quickly settle on a plan for her future that's surprisingly kind. Instead of being punished, she's going to hide her true identity as a great spirit and contract with Lucina as a high-rank spirit of darkness. She keeps a serious look while laying out the terms, making it clear this is her only path forward. When she mentions how surprised he seemed, Magnus admits he expected her to be executed or handed over to the state. Noting how much he's softened up since his ruthless younger days, she watches him turn away as he insists the deal is strictly for the sake of the kids. Since Chizuru and Lucina both begged him to help, Magnus feels he has to step up as a father and grant their wish. He promises to handle the authorities himself, but warns her that she is responsible for keeping a low profile. Looking at him thoughtfully, she lets the warning sink in. Then he ruins the serious mood by offering to teach her the secret techniques he uses to sneak out for fun at night. She can only stare back in disbelief, wondering if he is actually a responsible parent. After that whole conversation, Chizuru lets out a long sigh of relief. He figures his dad hasn't changed a bit, but he's just happy Lucina isn't in danger anymore. A small smile tugs at his lips as the weight finally starts to lift off his shoulders. Rouge watches him closely, her expression turning surprisingly serious. Since she feels like she owes him a favor, she decides to share a little secret. She shows him a vial of elixir, explaining that this legendary medicine can cure absolutely any sickness or wound. He looks stunned as she adds that the medicine could even heal the scars left behind by a god's attack. Leaping toward her, he asks where he can find it, but she admits it has been over 1,000 years since she heard about its location. Since it should still be out there somewhere, she figures he can track it down himself. She lets out a long yawn and admits she is finally getting sleepy. Before drifting off, she warns him to treat the sleeping girl right since she spent the whole time nursing him back to health. If he doesn't, she promises to kill him on the spot. With that threat out of the way, she gives him a casual goodbye. Chizuru smiles back and tells her he'll see her soon. Fading into a soft glow, she realizes it's been ages since someone talked to her like a friend. A soft moan breaks the silence in the room. Lukina whispers his name, her voice sounding weak but steady. Slowly, her eyes flutter open, showing she's finally awake for real.